So this guy and this gorgeous girl, Joel, were totally alone in a room with rain pouring outside. He was all over her, completely blowing her off when she told him to stop, but the dude was just so lost in the moment that her words weren't even getting through. So yeah, Joel shoved him away and totally shamed him, calling him out by his full name. She had zero time for romance, because she was stressing about whether Tess really ordered the execution of the Marquise's heir. The guy didn't deny it, which is when he proposed to Joel, and then he just suddenly tossed her on the bed, claiming he was crazy in love with her, and that no one else was allowed to even think about her. They were about to kiss when the girl started wondering, how did my life even get to this point? Just a little while ago, she was living in the normal world where she got attacked, ended up in the hospital. And no matter what the doctors did, she died, only to be reborn in a completely different world. Her past life felt like some messed up nightmare, which was seriously freaking out her younger sister Gail sitting next to her. Gail was worried her big sister was sick or something. Duchess Seal and the Duke of Hardland were worried too. The Duke even offered to stop the carriage. The thing is, Joel was on her way to the capital for the first time in 14 years. Gail just figured her sister was nervous, but it was way more complicated than that. When they arrived, Joel got out and realized the city hadn't changed much, but now she was the one who was a total stranger here. As the family walked to their house, Joel realized how cliché this all was, dying by some thugs then waking up in this world. For most people, being reborn might seem like a miracle, but she'd never read fantasy novels, so she just wasn't feeling it. But this was her reality now, and she was the daughter of one of the Empire's founders. The Duke of Hardland looked out at the palace. That was their home now. Gail couldn't believe it, but honestly, Joel didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that these people loved her. The bottom line was that her sister was born after their family was exiled to Varen, all because of Joel, so she apologized for it. Right then, they all pulled her into a huge hug and told her to never say that again, because none of it was her fault. To be honest, that's when it hit her that she'd found a real family. Even though she felt like an outsider at first, she now saw that she had a real purpose here. So she asked her parents to get her into the Conium Research Institute. It was a government school where they studied mana and magic. And now she was standing in a crowd of future students, realizing this place was basically for nobles only. The girl hoped she could finally find the answer to how she was able to jump between the two worlds. She got in, but she was still shocked they accepted her since she took the exams totally separate from everyone else. Joel remembered the day she went to apply and the super weird vibe from the guy at the desk. It was only now looking at the papers that she realized the institute knew she was coming. Whatever she was just hyped that she would finally get to start learning magic. Suddenly, some student walking toward her called her out. It was a blonde girl who wasn't exactly a ray of sunshine, and she had her whole crew with her. She knew Joel's full name, and she walked right up to her asking if she wasn't supposed to be in exile. That started a wave of whispers through the crowd. The gossip got louder even though everyone knew the crown prince did not need to hear any of this. Joel remembered the boy who cried his eyes out, confessing his love to her, and figured he must be the king now. The girl talking to her started to get ticked off because Joel was totally ignoring her, lost in her own thoughts. The girl demanded an answer, but Joel stayed silent. She remembered she was the Marquise's daughter. Joel had no plans to get into a power struggle, which meant she didn't need to feel sorry for this girl one bit. So she laughed, which just made the other girl even more confused and angry. But the best part was when Joel asked the Marquise's daughter if she was sure she was an aristocrat's kid and not some nobody's. I mean, a Marquise's daughter had no right to talk to a stranger with that kind of tone. That's a sign of a seriously bad upbringing. The blonde girl totally did not see that coming, and the crowd was already buzzing about her nasty attitude. Lily thought that just because she was from House Schwen, she wasn't just a noble, she was special. I mean, she was planning on becoming the emperor's wife, and he just happened to be walking up behind Joel. Joel didn't hear him, so she just told Lily that who His Majesty marries is still up in the air. This totally infuriated the Marquise's daughter, and she yelled that there was no way the fallen daughter of House Hardland could ever get close to the prince. That comment didn't even faze Joel because she suddenly felt a seriously dangerous presence right behind her. The girl spun around. The emperor was standing right there. He's the one who ordered her family back to the capital, but some people ignored his command, and then he looked right at Joel and ordered her to be taken away and executed. In that moment, Joel was terrified because the person in front of her looked nothing like Tess, the guy who was supposed to be emperor. There are tons of worlds, and the people living in them have no idea the others exist. The girl closed the book, figuring there must be travelers between worlds, but that piece of information was so not enough, and she kept digging through books, but they were all completely useless. It was so annoying that no one had bothered to write down how to, jump between dimensions. And of course, Tess totally caught her. He came up to her saying how much he missed her while hiding a bouquet behind his back, but even back then Joel was super formal with him, and would rather just read a book. Still, Tess begged her to just use his first name, and then out of nowhere asked her to marry him. The prince literally wanted to be with her 24/7, but she was on a completely different page. She just kept on reading. But then, super casually, she brought up again how she wasn't into him. But Tess just would not give up and actually asked her what her type was. The guy standing in front of her now was a completely different Tess from the one she remembered. The old Tess was always crying or sick and followed her around like a lost puppy. She legit didn't recognize him now, but she was really hoping they hadn't lost that connection they had as kids. Still, doubts were creeping in because the man in front of her was just so cold and serious. All of a sudden, the Marquis's daughter was grabbed, and the Institute's director ran up pleading with the Emperor to have pity on the clueless student. Tess, however, had a different idea since the last Emperor had taken everything from the Hardland family, so he felt it was his job to get payback. But the Marquis's daughter had no idea what was going on, and just stared at him, sobbing. Her tears only seemed to tick him off more, and he loomed over her, asking how she had the nerve to act that way. Joel watched the whole scene unfold. She couldn't wrap her head around how her friend had turned into this heartless black-haired guy in just 14 years. The girl didn't get why no one else was noticing these changes, because golden eyes and hair were the ultimate sign of legitimate power. Whatever. She bowed and asked the Emperor to please pardon the Marquis's daughter. Joel tried to convince him that a generous move like that would make all his subjects respect him. The seconds ticked by, but Tess didn't answer and she started to get really scared. That he might have actually forgotten her over the years, but he hadn't. He didn't threaten her. Instead, he called her request noble, but the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. His expression was so intimidating, it was no wonder the director was just agreeing with him from the background. Tess finally broke the silence. He ordered the servants not to kill Lily, but to lock her up in the dungeon. But that wasn't all. He then looked straight at her. He had an idea. The young man wanted her to personally show him around the academy. It's not like she had a choice. So Joel agreed, even though being around him gave her the creeps. The tour of the academy started, and Tess and Joel walked into the park. On the narrow path, they were both dead silent, but she couldn't feel any kind of magic that would let him change his appearance so drastically. She knew there could be magic in this world she'd never even heard of, but still. And then he hugged her, saying her name over and over again. It totally snapped her out of her thoughts and left her with a million questions because she so did not see that coming. He whispered, admitting he'd made a huge mistake before. She had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, and he apologized for taking so long, thinking that was why she had bowed to him. At that moment, Joel felt his tears on her neck, and the young man was crying, begging her for forgiveness. Now, looking at his tear-stained face, she finally recognized the features of her childhood friend. The Emperor admitted that he was afraid, that she had forgotten him. She had always remembered him, and she had so many questions, but seeing him cry just made her feel all soft again. Even so, you couldn't believe that this man and the boy from her memories were the same person, and it was seriously messing with her. So she just asked him straight up how he managed to change his whole look like that. It was simple. He kissed her hand, saying that it wasn't magic, it was just what she'd liked since they were kids. It turned out that as a child she once said that she liked guys with black hair and eyes, so he changed his appearance. Not only that, but he became emperor just so they would never be apart again, and now he was leaning in to kiss her. In that instant, Joel realized she had jumped to conclusions again, and he was getting closer, whispering that everything that was his was now hers. Now she knew she was in the Emperor's perfect trap, and even though his whole declaration of love sounded legit, something was really bothering the Duke's daughter. As a kid, she never cried, so everyone thought she was a super strange child and didn't want to be her friend. Tess was her total opposite, a kid who was constantly crying, and felt actual pain just from interacting with other people. The boy's father was worried that his son had no friends, so he set up a meeting with her. A miracle happened. It didn't hurt Tess to look at Joel, so he started following her everywhere. He'd just pop in and out whenever he wanted, which was so annoying since she was always trying to read. In those books, Joel was looking for a way to get back home, but with no luck at all. That's why she was so stressed, but the boy couldn't understand it and would just bring her flowers every time. He was so bored. It seemed to him that the girl was sick or something because her face never lit up when he showed up. But in the next second she'd smile because sometimes his antics were actually kind of funny. 14 years ago, everything in this world seemed super weird and basic to her, but now looking at Tess, she realized her mistake. Yeah, he was being sincere now, but she couldn't believe that she was the reason for his huge change. The guy noticed that the girl was totally spacing out and decided to get her attention by trying to kiss her again. So with literally 1 second left, Joel shoved Tess away. She had zero desire to let him do anything more than a friendly hug. He was kind of bummed that she was still giving him the cold shoulder, but she was curious if he actually changed his whole look for her. The answer was a big yes, and he'd even tweaked the design of the imperial robes to be more her style. He just had to know if she was into him now or not. She was totally speechless, so he offered to make his whole outfit black if she wanted, but Joel couldn't care less about the clothes. She only cared about what he did to his face. But Tess was no longer falling for her games and said he'd spill everything once she was his wife and they were alone. She just looked at him and realized this guy always got what he wanted. He was staring right back, totally clueless that she was racking her brain for a way to dodge marrying him. Then a thought hit her. What if being exiled to Vaughn somehow messed with his appearance? But how could she even guess? The girl turned to head home, but then His Majesty decided he was just going to tag along since he had a gift for her. Joel was so not okay with that and refused. But then Tess whipped out the pass to the Imperial Library. That pass was basically calling her name since she could borrow any book except the forbidden ones on magic. She just froze because Tess knew exactly how to twist the knife, knowing that she needed those books on magic. Joel was stung by his nerve, and the Emperor just cast a spell saying he'd be waiting for her at the palace. He was almost gone, but then added that he was waiting, but his patience wasn't gonna last forever. The portal snapped shut, and the guy vanished, leaving Joelle all alone in the forest. Total shock, that's what she felt because Tess was teleporting, and that was like the highest form of magic. Joelle got home and went straight to sword training, but her partner tired out super quick and asked for a timeout. Ethel, her childhood bestie, couldn't keep up with her friend's pace and was totally out of breath. To her, it just proved he was weak, even though he thought she was just going way too hard. Still, Ethel collapsed into his chair. He pointed out that she was the only person he knew who called the Imperial Knights weaklings. Besides, it wasn't that he was weak, she was just crazy strong thanks to her elven blood. But she blew it off and asked why he hadn't written her a single letter, but he promised he'd written to her every single day. Ethel got a little flustered because he'd put a ton of effort into every letter. The girl totally saw him blushing. But she wondered if the guy had been to the palace and how often, and if so, didn't he think Tess had changed way too much? But Ethel, his parents, and everyone else who had met with the Emperor hadn't noticed that his appearance was any different. She put the invitation to the Imperial Library on the table and confessed that Tess seriously scared her, which surprised her friend. But maybe that was the whole point. From the moment he became Emperor, a dark cloud had rolled over the entire empire. That's why Ethel begged Joelle to just stay out of it all. She had a bad feeling herself, so she really wanted to stay away from all this, and she would have if she wasn't so desperate to learn more about magic. So she went to the palace. At that very moment, Tess was standing at the window, watching her approach the palace. He was thrilled since he'd waited way too long for her to finally be in his life. When she walked into the room, she immediately heard some men talking about the whole situation with Lily. The nobles were claiming it was all Joelle's fault, and her family's for coming back to the capital. Joelle tried to slip by them, but she overheard the men's fears that she might actually become empress. She hated what she was hearing since the last thing she wanted was for rumors like that to start spreading. Tess was obsessed with Joelle, so they had scrapped the rule that the heir of the founding marquis had to become his wife. That's why the last emperor kept her family on such a tight leash, because she was supposed to marry his son. For now, Joelle didn't want to bring any more pain to her family. Walking through the halls, she remembered coming to see the Emperor 14 years ago, but even at 6 years old she knew that the Emperor was in a really weird mood. The man freaked her out, talking right to her and demanding an honest answer to his question. He loomed over her, asking if she really liked people with black hair and eyes, and she said yes. Joelle's answer made the king let out this weird laugh, and her mom jumped in to defend her. The man started screaming and accusing the little girl of every sin imaginable, but the Duchess fired back, saying that elves were a symbol of purity, and Tess's choice was 100% on him. The Emperor realized he had gone way too far, and the elf demanded that he stop taking his anger out on her daughter. The ruler calmed down, and then ordered them to send Joelle and her parents to Vaughn and lock her away forever. The Emperor figured it was the best way to deal with the problem, since for him the Hardland family had always been a thorn in his side. Now Joelle was standing in front of the throne room door, again just like on that horrible day. She couldn't make herself open it because she never thought she'd be back here, and the vibe in the palace was still just as hostile, and Tess was watching her struggle from around the corner. Still, Joelle kept going and walked into the library, and her breath caught in her throat with pure awe. Tess wasn't lying. The library was so much bigger than it used to be. All of a sudden, Joel whipped around when she heard footsteps. It was some old librarian who pointed out that only royals were allowed in here. He adjusted his monocle, and then his eyes went wide when he recognized Joel. Turns out Tess had given the librarian a heads up she was coming, but after 14 years, he could barely believe the girl standing in front of him was the same person. On top of that, the old guy on orders from the Emperor had already gathered all the books she might need, which totally threw her. She had no idea the king had been thinking about her all this time. But then they stopped in front of a legit forbidden section. At that point, the librarian took a bow and bounced, leaving Joel alone with her books. After grabbing a huge stack of them, she started to dig in. No matter how cool the books were, Joel was still seriously mad at her old friend. Thinking about her life back in Warren, a place so cold the snow never melted, she just couldn't forgive Tess or his dad. But if she ever wanted to get back to her own world, she had to figure this out, so she pushed her pride and anger to the side. Her intense reading and brooding session was interrupted by Tess, who just sat down right next to her. He'd somehow magically figured out where she was, and was now just sitting there smiling. Joel tried to give him the cold shoulder, but it was useless. The guy just kept staring at her. Fine. If he was going to play games, she'd play too, asking him why nobody else seemed to notice how much he'd changed. Reaching out to him was a huge mistake, because he immediately laced their fingers together, saying he was so glad she was interested in him. But that wasn't enough for him. He had to go and try to make her die of embarrassment, saying it was insanely cute. But Joel's skills weren't just in books, she knew martial arts too. So she flipped the Emperor onto the table and told him to back off already. That kind of strength and attitude completely shocked the young man. But Joel wasn't letting him off that easy, reminding him that she'd warned him to keep his hands to himself, and everything would be cool. The position they were in was pretty intense. Still, Tess wasn't embarrassed at all. He just laughed, pointing out how strong she was, and then he pulled her into a hug, saying he liked this side of her even better. But that just made Joel furious with the whole situation. She was literally shaking with rage. He just wasn't listening. Joel shoved him away with all her might, sending the Emperor flying into a wall and hitting his head. He looked hurt and offended, but Joel figured he was asking for it and didn't feel bad at all. As she looked at Tess, she realized his whole personality was different now, too. It was like he knew everything about her and was just using her to get what he wanted. A knot of anxiety formed in her stomach, but she couldn't look away from him. She tried to chalk it up to his new Emperor vibe and turned away. But Tess didn't take his eyes off her, saying that if she was attracted to him now, then everything he'd done was worth it. Those words made Joel spin back around to face her friend again. Something was seriously wrong. It was time to get the truth, so she asked him again flat out how he had changed himself. The young man finally started to explain. He was connected to the imperial court. The first emperor had united the northern lands and created the empire, but there was still drama in the south and fights with the nobles, which led to a lot of betrayal. To prevent that, he bonded himself with the imperial palace to see everything that happened inside the castle. This magical contract is passed down through the ruling family. So basically this was his turf, and since Tess was stronger than any emperor before him, he could influence everyone who was or had ever been in the castle. In other words, he could control people's memories. Joel realized that every single aristocrat at Tess's coronation had been under his spell. She also knew this wasn't some everyday magic trick, which meant some seriously powerful forces were at play. This info just made the girl more determined to learn everything about magic. The thing that surprised her, though, was that his spell had zero effect on her, and the reason was the elven blood in her veins. The guy just kept looking at her, explaining that the imperial family's spells don't work on elves and fairies. That part made sense to Joel, but Tess's total calm about it was freaking her out. So she decided to hit back, threatening to tell everyone in the empire about his little deception. She was trying to make him angry to scare him, but the look in his eyes was something else entirely, and it put her on edge. Tess was quiet, and she couldn't tell if her threat had landed or not, but then once again things went completely off script. He pressed her hand to his cheek and told her that he trusted and loved her with his whole heart. I mean, she had always been on his side, but she pulled her hand back. The look on his face fell. He obviously didn't expect to be shut down by her. That was it. She decided to leave, having had way too many shocks for one day. She didn't even care that he was trying to stop her. He tried to remind her that she used to like this side of him, but she ignored him and walked right past, heading for the exit. The second her hand touched the doorknob, Tess said that if she kept acting like this, he would have Lily executed. But it didn't faze her. She just told him to do it if he really wanted to. As she left, Tess called after her, asking if she hated him. She didn't answer that question, just said they'd see each other next time, and walked out. Now a closed door stood between them, and both of them just felt completely crushed by the whole situation. Joel knew she needed time to figure out what to do with her life. Meanwhile, Tess was breaking down, knowing he would totally lose it without her. The girl was walking through the palace halls. She couldn't stop thinking about what her friend said. Like, who else hated Tess for the person he'd become? It was just so hard to get who would want to hurt the adorable little prince he used to be. She had this vivid flashback of 6-year-old Tess running to her with books in these same hallways. It hit her like a ton of bricks back then. She was totally on his team. They were basically inseparable. As kids, they were supposed to go to magic lessons together, and he was so stoked about it. But she was already thinking ahead, knowing that being friends with the prince was her ticket to study with the Archmage. He got super clingy, taking everything to heart, just happy that she was happy. Even then, she kind of wanted him to back off, but he was always around, trusting her with everything. But still, Joel trusted the sweet blonde-haired boy, too. On that day 14 years ago, they showed up for their lesson with the Archmage. She was trying super hard to make a good impression on the guy and did a little curtsy. The old magician totally dug the gesture and was checking her out with this intense curiosity. Under his gaze, Joel started freaking out, thinking maybe he knew she was from another world and how she could get back home. But that wasn't it at all. The Emperor had already given him the heads up, so he knew nothing about her whole reincarnation thing. Meanwhile, Tess was gassing her up, ignoring the dirty looks from the servants. But the craziest part? Even back then, he was already talking about marrying her. This made her so mad, and she glanced back at the Empress's staff, realizing she could be in major trouble for this. She totally told Tess off and begged him to never say that again, but the prince was just clueless. He probably thought no one was even listening. He shot a look at the servants that made them break out in a cold sweat. Just like that, the servants bounced, and the prince, all happy, asked her to use his book for the lesson. Once they were gone, the magician started. The lesson began. The mage explained that the source of all magic was mana. Joel was hanging on his every word, but Tess literally only had eyes for her. There was a chart on the board showing how mana is basically the energy that keeps a person going. That was just the intro. Then Joel flipped to the right page in the textbook and asked the magician if he knew the story of the Sky Fairy and the Woodcutter. She wasn't just asking for fun. She was hoping the places in the story were actually different worlds. Finally, working up the nerve, she asked if there was a way to, travel between worlds. Her question totally threw the magician for a loop. He stroked his beard, trying to figure out what to say. After a minute, he said that it all comes down to the magical power of a person. Or a place. So, if you could harness the magic from the mountain in the legend, you could totally open a portal to another world. Joel got so hyped hearing that, but then the mage added that it was impossible. Turns out he had no clue how to open that door, and just like that, all her hopes were crushed. World hopping was something only the celestial fairy could do, and it was a total no-go for humans. Hearing that was a total bummer for her, and Tess immediately noticed her mood shift. The magician sensed the awkward vibe in the room too, and said that maybe some higher beings might know the way to other worlds. That got Tess thinking maybe demons knew how to open portals. The magician was super offended and told the prince not to even bring up demons. But the boy wasn't listening to his teacher. He just hugged his girl. The lesson was finally over. Later that night, the kids were in bed, but neither of them was asleep. Tess was so happy he got to have a sleepover in his friend's room while she was just trying to read. He'd basically thrown a massive tantrum demanding to stay with Joel for the night. She was not a fan of his little performance. She knew that. The emperor could totally get on her case for it, so the prince suggested she stay at the castle instead. No way. The main character could barely even breathe in that place. But Tess thought the idea was super cute. Joel kept being a total party pooper, so the boy playfully tapped her cheek and said they needed to get married right now. This made her blush and get mad at the same time, and he dove under the blanket to escape her glare. Sometimes it really bugged her how he acted like such a baby, but not in moments like this when he was holding her hand. After all, Tess would literally do anything she wanted. Joel thanked the prince for the thought, not even sure what she truly wanted herself. In her dreams, she saw flashes of her past life of doctors trying to save her life. And then she was just standing there in the middle of a morgue watching her mom cry over her dead body. The room was terrifying, blood was everywhere, and when she touched a stain, this super weird feeling washed over her. She got blood on her and collapsed to her knees as this insane pain shot through her. Tears were just streaming down her face, and she wished her mom was there to make the pain go away. It was a total nightmare, and Joel woke up drenched in a cold sweat in her bed. The prince was leaning over her, totally freaked out, begging his friend to wake up. But Joel was not having it and told him to back off. He backed up and she sat up in bed. It drove her crazy how he never listened and just did whatever he wanted. Still, she let out a sigh because deep down she knew her friend had done the right thing by waking her up from that nightmare. Apparently, she'd been screaming in her sleep, saying over and over that she was in pain, so he had to wake her. The worst part was that the pain didn't just disappear. The spot where she'd been stabbed still ached. These dreams about her past life were becoming normal for Joel, but they freaked everyone else out. Over and over, she had to relive the feeling totally cursed and alone like it was the end. She mumbled her last words out loud, and the prince crawled over and asked again what she said, but Joel just blew him off, and then she invited the guy to grab breakfast with her and headed for the door. They got dressed and went down to the dining room where the servants had already laid out this awesome spread. Then out of nowhere, the Duchess ran into the room and scooped Joel up in a huge hug, all like, "Good morning!" But Joel was so not into it, thinking her mom was being way too strong again. The woman totally ignored her vibe, though, and just said their sweet little girl should sleep with them. The Duke who just walked in was all for it, especially since the prince was visiting. The Duchess finally put her daughter down and went over to Tess to officially welcome him. Once they started eating, Joel noticed the guy couldn't even manage to cut his own steak. His fingers were all messed up, and she just kept side-eyeing him, not offering to help, but then she finally felt bad for him and just slid her plate over. She also totally called him out on cutting himself again. She tried to help her mom notice that her daughter had a total soft spot for the crown prince. That made Joel freeze up and start denying it, no way. The Duchess just gave her this look, and suddenly Joel remembered her past life, how her dad had totally bailed on her and her mom for some other woman. It made her mom's health get way worse, but she still took care of Joel, and it just left this ache inside the girl. And now in this new world, it all clicked. Taking care of Tess was probably her way of making up for not being there for her mom back then. And he just calmly took the steak from her. I mean, when you think about it, the prince and her mom are kind of the same, super clumsy and always crying. Joel remembered how her mom would always smile at her even when she was in the hospital. It made her feel so sad. She just hoped her mom got the help she needed even after she was gone. Looking at the super happy Duke and Duchess, Joel knew she didn't love them, but she was crazy grateful to them. All of a sudden, this sharp pain shot through her, and she grabbed her stomach. She knew it was the memories hitting her, so Joel just wanted to go home and ask the Duchess if it was for real. That elves were tight with the heavenly fairies. And if they were, maybe she knew how to jump between worlds. She said it with a smile, but underneath she was desperate to go back home and totally unsure about everything. The elf was like, "Wait, what?" Since she never expected a question like that from her daughter. She had no idea why her kid was asking, but Joel just stayed quiet and stared at her mom. Joel was stuck. She remembered how psyched they were to have her, and how much they loved her, so she just made up some believable excuse that made the Duchess happy. But even though the elf was relieved, she couldn't tell her daughter anything about other worlds. This totally ticked Joel off because she figured since her mom was from the fairy world, she'd spill the tea. But nope, it was a huge secret. The Duchess sighed, seeing how bummed out Joel was. The deal was elves lived with humans, so they were forbidden from telling them the truth. The promise was basically an unbreakable contract. The Duchess tried to explain it was all about keeping things in order, but Joel wasn't backing down. Now she wanted to know which god the elves made this deal with. But she got nothing on that question either, which just made her more frustrated. So after breakfast, she and the prince hit the library and started searching like crazy. She was tossing books aside one after another, even though she swore she'd seen the right one on this shelf before. And then finally she got her hands on the right one. She cracked open the book and started reading, totally ignoring Tess. Turns out in the beginning there was the god of light Lux and the god of darkness Devil. Lux made the continent and taught people how to fight off the devil's shady tricks. But after a while, Lux just vanished and the whole continent split in two, the believers and the non-believers. And that was literally it for the story about the gods, which made Joel even more mad. The rest of the book was just about the power struggle between the Northern and Southern empires. But there was one interesting thing: since the Northern Empire had zero religion, nobody really wrote about the gods. Still, lately people had started getting into Lux, but it didn't really change anything. So Joel just slammed the book shut and flopped onto the floor because nothing was going her way. That's when Tess sat down next to her. He just stared at her and was like, "You're acting super weird today." They were both just lying there on the floor. The prince told her he'd hang out a little longer before heading home. Joel couldn't believe he was that into her, but it was for real. So Tess asked her again to come live with him. Apparently the prince already had his dad's permission to marry a good person. The way he said it kind of freaked her out, and she told him to never ever say that to other people again. Joel didn't want him to get in trouble, especially since his mom was watching his every move. The Empress was even setting up these kid meetings to hook him up with some marquise's daughter. But since Tess was acting like a clueless puppy, Joel had to remind him that people get married when they're, adults. Then she started describing her ideal type, who was so not him. She made a big deal about black hair and eyes, and the prince just nervously fidgeted and just listened. And after she heard him out, she was ready to bounce, not realizing Tess had memorized every single word. But she was stuck in her own head, so she told him again to just drop the whole wedding thing. Tess totally lost it, bursting into tears and grabbing her dress, begging her to please just give him a chance. His blue eyes all shiny with tears were kinda gorgeous, and his face right then was actually super cute. But Joel pried his hand off, saying that crying wasn't the move. But Tess grabbed her again, begging her to love him because he was ready to give her literally anything she wanted. Still, it didn't faze her because it was never about the money. She wasn't about to change who she was for him, so she just suggested they head back to the palace. Because of that, she totally missed the look in his eyes that said he'd do whatever it took to change her mind, even though he didn't want to go home. He said he'd only go if she took his hand. Since that was the deal, Joel took his hand and they left. The prince could feel she was being nice, but he wanted her to actually like love and care about him. He looked at her hand in his and had no clue how to make that happen. Joel wasn't just some bookworm either. She was also training with a sword with a private teacher. Her training was always watched super intensely by Tess, who was just chilling on a chair under an umbrella off to the side. She was getting really good, and he was her personal cheerleader, telling her how awesome she was. Her teacher was the Count Grand, who was basically this prince's shadow and used to be the head honcho of the knights. They were chilling for a sec when the knight was like, "Whoa, her stance is legit," which totally meant she'd done this before. Something like this before. Right then, another kid walked up to them and called her name. It was Ethel there to grab her because she'd skipped out on fencing class. Ethel was totally stoked to see Count Grand, and Joel was like, "Oops, forgot to tell you I was skipping." The two of them were laughing and talking, but the prince's face got stormier than a thundercloud. Ethel finally noticed him, and then something totally wild happened. Tess just lunged at the guy, fists flying, yelling that nobody said he could be here. He straight up slapped Ethel across the face and screamed at him to get lost. Count Grand had to jump in and drag the prince away, who was still demanding they kick the other kid off the training field. The count was trying to restrain this super jealous, raging prince while she was checking out the scratches on Ethel. That's when the prince just started bawling. He cried that he was way more than just her friend. That finally got Joel's attention, and from there it only got worse. Tess got super possessive, demanding that Joel only talk to him. This whole act started some major rumors. People were saying her family was trying to stage a takeover of the empire. A lot of people thought the heir was totally under her spell, but she didn't really buy his whole crush thing. She figured it was just some phase because he wanted to keep his only friend from leaving him. So she tried to reassure the kid that she'd always be his friend, even when he found someone else to crush on. That seemed to chill him out, and he thanked her. A little while later, the prince hit a major growth spurt and hadn't come to see the girl in some time. The Duke mentioned this to his wife, adding that the prince was going through some serious growing pains. Meanwhile, Joel was just quietly reading her book, listening to her parents talk. The Duchess gave her daughter a long look and asked if she missed having the prince around. The girl shot that down, saying she only missed her magic and sword-fighting lessons and was thinking about training with Ethel. The elf thought it'd be amazing if her daughter and Ethel got engaged someday. Her dad was totally blindsided by that, but his wife argued it would help their daughter. Put some space between her and the heir to the throne. The Duchess confessed she had a bad feeling about their daughter being so close to the prince. Joel realized it wasn't the first time her mom had said stuff like that. For a second, the main character realized that getting engaged was actually a pretty smart move for her, since it would get all that unwanted attention off their family's back. But then she snapped the book shut and said she was refusing the offer. Getting close to anyone else just wasn't part of her plan. She knew that one day she'd find a way back to her own world, so looking at her parents, she knew she couldn't let herself get too attached to anyone here. But what she said out loud was that her parents didn't need to stress about her and Tess. The girl added that the prince was basically like a brother to her. A little while later, those words suddenly felt super awkward, all because in the time they'd been apart, Tess had seriously grown up and was no longer a cute little angel. Even though he looked different, the way he felt about her hadn't changed at all. The moment they met, he totally kissed her hand and said it would literally break his heart if she acted like they were strangers. Yeah, the guy was not shy about his feelings at all. He basically told her she was the most beautiful girl in the world. The prince's behavior was so intense it made her blush, and she tried to escape the palace, saying it was too crowded. Tess told her she could basically do whatever she wanted in the Empire, so she definitely didn't need to bow to him. And then he added that he was going to change everything in the Empire, but got all mysterious about how just asking her to wait a little longer. It was right then that the girl's elven intuition first started screaming at her. From that day on, Tess was always at the palace, which was right around when a monster appeared, on the border taking people out. And then Tess's 6th birthday rolled around, and man, he looked like a whole different person that day. The banquet hall was packed since this was the prince's first real public appearance. When he made his first appearance since getting sick, everyone was totally shocked that the Duke of Hardland and his family actually showed up to the ball. The nobles were all whispering that the emperor himself was the one who gave her that dress. Joella was already dying to go home. Just then she spotted the redhead Schwen. Everyone around them was convinced the two were rivals competing to be the one to marry Tess. Suddenly the entire hall went dead silent, and the emperor started walking down the stairs. He wasn't alone. He was with his wife and the heir. Everyone bowed their heads in front of them. But the king told them all to rise. He gave his wife a sweet kiss and thanked her for putting the whole celebration together. Joella noticed the totally adoring way the emperor looked at the empress, but she quickly pushed the thought away, because this was the first time she'd seen Tess since that day in the library. In that instant, their eyes met. His whole face lit up and he looked like he was about to run right to her, but his mother's hand stopped him. The empress demanded her son act properly. He couldn't just do whatever he wanted, not when every single guest at the ball was staring at them. The prince started acting up and people began to gossip, saying more and more about how Joella was clearly his favorite. The nobles were trash-talking the girl and her parents, saying how disappointed they were. Joella clenched her fists, since that kind of talk was casting a shadow over her entire family. Her parents told her to just ignore all of it. Joella really didn't want to hurt the prince, but her parents were way more important to her, and Tess just stared at her, looking completely heartbroken. She bowed her head to the prince and apologized for being so late. He had no idea why she was doing this, and she knew perfectly well how much he hated all that formal stuff. With tears in his eyes, he asked why she was treating him like this. It was simple. She had to draw a clear line between them. The party just continued on. But Joella was already completely exhausted. She was just glad that all the guests were moving on to the banquet. Even though the emperor had stepped in a few minutes ago, she would remember the look on the prince's face forever. Now she was standing there all by herself by the ballroom window. She just hoped that Tess would finally learn to behave at these things from now on and would leave her alone. The girl knew deep down that her friend now felt completely abandoned by her. Just then Ethel walked up to her. He offered to go talk with the other kids, but Joella shut that down immediately. Ethel understood and decided to just hang out with her on the sidelines, because that's what real friends do. The girl then sarcastically asked if this was the reason he bailed on their sword-fighting lessons for a meeting with the Imperial Knights. He admitted that he wanted to be a captain of the Imperial Knights in the future, so he couldn't just pass up a chance like that. But she didn't get how he even got an invitation. It turned out the prince had pulled some strings which totally blew her mind. Apparently, Tess had personally asked the emperor to send Ethel the invitation. Ethel felt like the prince actually saw his talent and skills. This got her thinking, and seeing how Tess looked, she realized he was still sick. Joella started to freak out. She grabbed her friend because she never imagined the prince was *that sick. A thunderstorm started and she felt the whole vibe in the room change. She remembered that moment, because that's when Tess passed out. Everyone scattered in every direction. Her parents pulled her away, even though all she wanted was to run to Tess. Her father promised that everything would be fine with the prince since the doctor was already there. But for the first time ever, her father was wrong, and then came the exile. And now here she was back again drinking tea with friends and talking about the past. She confessed to them that she'd been thinking about how her life had gotten to this point. Her friends got curious about what she was remembering during their tea time. Joella's friend then smacked the nosy guy, trying to get him to shut up, but he completely missed the hint. So a bickering match started between Ethel and Lady Orin. Joella watched them amused, realizing her friends had a seriously interesting dynamic. And then she called them out, saying they managed to start a fight even with her sitting right there. Anyway, Ethel was still dying to know what his friend was thinking about. And he also couldn't wrap his head around how the two girls became friends. I mean, they were basically enemies for so long because of all that history with the prince. Turns out it was simple. When the Yule family was exiled, the girls started writing to each other. Thanks to Orin, Joella was kept in the loop on all the latest drama in the capital, and most importantly, Orin didn't forget about her, unlike some of her other friends. But Ethel swore that he wrote to her too. He was super hurt when he found out the girls were writing and that his friend never answered him. So every time he wanted to check in on his friend, he had to ask Orin about it. Joella sipped her tea, wondering where in the world Ethel's letters had disappeared to. On top of that, Orin told Ethel that she had never been enemies with Ule. At the end of the day, neither of them even wanted to marry Tess, and her heart was already taken. The girls were on the same page, but Ethel was once again totally clueless. Orin never expected her own little sister to try and take her spot. So even though it was super late, Orin apologized to Ula for her sister's little scheme at the university. The problem was that Orin's dad spoiled Lily rotten, so she always got away with whatever she wanted. It turned out that neither her younger brother nor Orin herself even talked to Lily. Still, their father just kept letting her get away with it. Orin was literally on her knees begging Joelle to use her pull with Tess to get her youngest daughter out of jail. Joelle was like, "I'm not even sure I have that kind of power with the Emperor," which totally threw Orin for a loop. Since hello, she remembered how tight Joelle and Tess used to be. Orin was hoping her sister had learned her lesson, but Joelle was straight up like, "The only reason I forgave her is because we're family." So the tea party wrapped up and her friends bounced. After seeing them off, Joelle was walking home when she, accidentally on purpose, ended up back at that park right by the tree she knew so well. Her parents planted it for her when she was born, and it was her and Tess's spot when they were kids. The girl had been so worried it would wither away during those 14 years, but it survived and was now all huge and beautiful. And just then, the Emperor himself popped up behind her. Even though she'd begged him to stay away, he just hugged her, saying that since she wouldn't come to him, he had to come find her. For the 100th time. Joelle had told her old friend to stop showing up at her house. The guy started crying again, going on about how much he loved Joelle and couldn't get why she hated him so much. He was even ready to forgive and let Lily go just for her. Tess pleaded with her not to be so cruel, insisting she didn't really hate him. But she just turned away, saying that now that Tess was the Emperor, they couldn't be friends like they used to. After all, Joelle didn't want any more nasty rumors spreading about her family. He grabbed her hand and told her not to even worry about it, because no one would dare say a single word. Tess smiled through his tears, as he made a promise. 14 years ago he said he'd give her anything she wanted and way more. They just stood there facing each other in silence, but the girl remembered what he'd told her all those years ago. It felt to Joelle like nothing had changed except her. So she caved, telling the guy that if she was going to meet him halfway, she'd talk to him like she used to, which made him crazy happy. Right after Tess gave her a super tight hug, thanking her for saying yes, Joelle actually hugged him back, calling him a total Klingon. She was just glad things in her life here were finally getting better, so she could go back to her own world with a clear conscience. So cut to Joelle and Tess just chilling side by side in a gazebo in the park. The guy figured that his friend was probably still practicing her magic and fencing. She admitted she got super lucky finding good teachers, because they were the only reason she got into the university and didn't just give up. He was pretty amazed by her persistence, but she was more curious about what his life had been like this whole time. Tess was kind of shocked by her question, and she admitted that yeah, for a while in exile she was seriously mad at him. Her family was completely innocent. They were stuck in the middle of nowhere, and she never got a single letter from the guy, but then she found out the prince wasn't even allowed to leave. The palace and the empress had another son. Just like that, her anger turned into shock, because she realized her friend's life was no fairy tale either. Now she understood that his parents were not thrilled with the changes in their oldest son. After a long, awkward pause, Tess admitted that the whole time he had only been thinking about her. This was kind of hard to believe since he spent a whole year thinking about whether or not to bring them back to the capital after he became emperor. The emperor got all anxious. He touched her hand, scared he was too late, and then he leaned in closer and asked if she really missed him that much. He took her silence as a yes and kissed her. But it was a totally impulsive move and she turned away. Joelle got super embarrassed and immediately started backpedaling, saying she just wanted her family to live in the capital, that's all. Unlike her, Tess was totally open about it and said he'd been dreaming of seeing her this whole time. He gently stroked her hair, saying how much he missed her, and that he'd prayed to the gods to see her at least one more time. After her hair, he brushed her earlobe and noticed the girl was blushing hard. The guy actually thought she had a fever. Joel shoved him away, saying he was acting super weird today. He just thought it was hilarious because he'd always been this weird. It was hard to argue with that, but now, everything just felt different. That made him curious, but Joelle herself didn't know how to explain it. So she just blamed her reaction on the fact they hadn't seen each other for a long time, but she couldn't stop overthinking her reaction to him. The Emperor was pleased, so he decided to give her time to get used to it and just pulled her into a hug. This whole vibe wasn't exactly what Joelle wanted, so she asked him to stop. He agreed. The Emperor wanted her to visit him more often, but that was going to be a problem since she'd be swamped at the university. But Tess just kissed her hand and confidently said that she would definitely visit him. Our girl had no idea what to say to that kind of nerve. It was getting dark. Joelle was walking down the hall trying to process her friend's behavior. The Emperor's words were so cryptic, and the girl couldn't figure out how to take them. Suddenly, she noticed a light on in the waiting room. She went into the room and walked in on a really unpleasant scene. It was Maris Shen. He was grabbing her dad's hand, begging the man to listen to him. It was something she'd kind of expected, but wanted no part of. But, just to be polite, she asked her father what was going on. The Marquis dropped to his knees and started begging Joelle to help get his daughter out of the dungeon. The Duke helped the Marquis get up, and the girl said she wasn't interested in the story. And honestly, she thought the Marquis could have been a lot more polite, seeing as it was his daughter who dragged her family's name through the mud. She got in trouble for the guy started begging her *again* to save his daughter Lily from, execution. Joel was so confused, why is he bringing this up again? And her mind started racing about the whole trial situation when suddenly her dad dropped a bombshell. The Confederation was totally gone. Turns out the Emperor just wiped it out and straight up executed half of the members. Okay, now. She got what Edel meant by that whole bloody wind thing. The Marquis finally bounced, and the whole house went quiet. The Duke was super relieved that the Marquis' son was actually a decent dude, and not a total psycho. Seriously, if the son hadn't dragged his dad out, her father would have had to call the guards. Joel was thinking the same thing. It was a good thing that guy showed up. Tess grabbed his dad and was totally apologizing for his crazy behavior, promising to come back for a proper visit. You could tell he felt awful about his dad begging her like that. Then it hit Joel. Tess and Oren were so alike in how they could keep their cool. But now her mind was stuck on the Confederation. For real, were all of them sent to the chopping block. The tea was that a bunch of nobles were plotting a coup while they were in exile, but then their leader Duke Grantia just randomly died. After that, the Imperial Knights all bent the knee to Tess. That guy didn't just expose the whole plot, he seized all the traitors' land and stuff too. When Joel's dad heard what went down, he was seriously glad they were so far from the capital. Word on the street was that the Emperor had chilled out a lot since they got back. Still, her dad was totally freaking out about her, so she promised she'd watch her back. The next day, she rolled up to the palace to meet with the Emperor. TBH, she was planning on ghosting him for a while, but things got complicated. She knew that everyone around her probably saw Tess as some kind of monster, but nobody knew the real him. She just wanted to see if her friend was okay, so the second he walked in, her eyes were glued to him. And he was totally beaming like he knew she'd come. He was all smiles, but Joel immediately went on the attack. She just didn't get why Tess was being so harsh with Lily. His answer was simple. He didn't want the girl he liked worrying about someone who disrespected her. Let's be real, Joel wouldn't have cared about Lily at all if she wasn't Oren's sister. Tess just laughed and offered her a deal, one kiss for Lily's freedom. He wrapped his arm around her and his lips brushed against her neck. He was so close to getting what he wanted, but at the last second, she shut him down. But since the kiss was a no-go, he just lightly licked her hand instead. He decided that was probably enough for one day because even with the total cringe, she couldn't take it anymore. She yanked her hand back and smacked him, realizing he was impossible to deal with. It was super obvious she was absolutely furious with him. Seeing his little game didn't work, Tess promised he'd let Lily go. But now Joel was more freaked out by the fact she almost kissed him. She knew she had to put that cocky jerk in his place. Meanwhile, as she was turned away, he watched her and asked her to forgive him. Then he smiled, and for a second she didn't even recognize the Tess who used to be like her little brother. Their eyes met and she was like, how could I have been so wrong about him? Her heart was going crazy just looking at her new old friend. Finally, she managed to get out of the palace and was riding away in the carriage, so glad to be out of there. It was only then that Joel realized she'd somehow miraculously not given away her real feelings. If the Emperor ever found out about *, he'd drag her down the aisle ASAP. Then, she caught herself picturing him in a white wedding tux. She knew thoughts like that were going to make her lose her mind, but she just couldn't stop. It was his scent, the way he moved his smile. It literally made her body tremble and pull her in. Whenever he was near, she'd get all flustered. Now she could see so clearly how he had changed for her, and how much he'd given up for her too. Joel had tried to get over him 100 times, but it was no use. She knew that if she ever wanted to get back to her own world, she had to focus only on that and not on some stupid crush. When she finally got home, the butler met her. She asked if everything was quiet while she was gone, but nope. Turns out someone was waiting for her in the garden. And in the garden was none other than Tus Oren's younger brother. Joel had to admit she was totally expecting to see his sister, not him. So yeah, his visit was a complete surprise. The guy wanted to talk about the whole incident from before, and Joel was kind of relieved to see his manners had gotten way better. Tus genuinely apologized to Joel for how his dad and sister had acted. For some reason, his apology gave her all these mixed feelings. She told him to get up, saying he really didn't have to apologize to her. She totally hadn't expected the guy to actually bow to her, so things got super awkward. Tus was so different from his dad and his little sister Lily. But he didn't back down, saying that since he's the future head of the family, that means he's also responsible for his family's screw-ups. That attitude made him seem was totally desperate for Lily to marry the Emperor. Like the original plan was for Oren to do it, but that whole thing crashed and burned. So boom, Lily was born to be Oren's replacement, and honestly, she was cool with it. Her little sis pretty well, but the second Joel hit the capital again, she got all stressed out. I mean, everyone was saying her and the Emperor were a thing, which she was like totally shutting down. When Tus heard Joel and the Emperor were just friends, he was so relieved. Joel was seriously hoping she'd heard him wrong. He got all awkward and said he was just trying to say sorry for how Lily acted. If that was the case, Joel was like, apology accepted. Once he knew his sister was off the hook, Tus told Joel he'd always been a huge fan of her sense of justice. He also heard she was getting invited to all these dinner parties, so he offered to be her +1. Apparently, while she was gone, things totally changed. Now girls have to show up to these things with a date. She took him up on it since she wanted to get all the latest tea and told him she'd hit him up with the deets. He was really hoping that next time she'd actually call him by his name. He just wished she'd be as chill with him as she was with everyone else. A few days later, Joel was getting ready for a party when her little sister announced that Lord Tus was already there. Joel looked absolutely killer. Gwell whined that she wanted to go too, but Joel just told her to enjoy the days when she didn't have to deal with all these boring balls. Joel peeked out the window and saw Tus waiting for her by the carriage. Her sister could not stop staring, saying how hot Joel's date was. Just then the guy looked up and totally locked eyes with Joel, then gave her this sweet little smile. Joel sighed. She had no idea what was going on in this guy's head. They hopped in the carriage and started making some super awkward small talk about basically nothing. He somehow even knew that Joel got asked to join the university's new magic project. Joel was kind of freaked out by how much this guy knew about her. The dude was a little bummed that she wouldn't use his first name, but for her, it was the only way to play it safe. She knew for a fact that if she started calling him by his first name, it would start some nasty rumors. When Joel said something else, Tus just laughed, and she had no clue what was so funny. Then he told her that the rules for talking to aristocrats hadn't changed at all. The guy admitted he'd noticed she always kept him at arm's length. It's been like that since they were kids. She'd always refused to use his first name, saying it could mess things up for their families, and then she became besties with Oren. But he was sure it would be totally fine now, so he basically begged her to think of him as a little brother or a super close friend. He was so persistent that she finally caved. The carriage pulled up. The hall was already packed with people, including Ethel and Oren, who Joel went right over to. Oren was shook that her little brother was actually on a date with her friend, but Joel was way more interested in how cozy Ethel and Oren were getting. Ethel confessed he was out of options for a date since Joel was going with Tus. And even though Joel hated these parties, she had to show up, and Lord Tus had offered to be her date. All of a sudden, Tus called her by her first name, and everyone nearby just froze. After that, the guys started bickering over who was allowed to call her by her nickname and who wasn't. Joel knew this was a total disaster. Oren ditched the guys to sort it out and pulled her friend away, where she could finally breathe. She thanked Joel for getting her little sister home. Turns out Tess let Lily go, but only if the Marquis gave the Empire some land down south. That's where the diamond mines were, which was basically how the Zen family made all their money. It was a total power move from Tess using the whole situation to take the Marquise's family down a notch. Joel had to admit the Emperor's move was brilliant. Tess had cleaned up all the shady stuff in the country, so he had nothing to sweat anymore. She was actually glad Tess was handling royal duties, way better than she ever thought he would. Meanwhile, Ethel and Tus were the center of attention. Ethel was known as the best knight around, and Tus was all about his business ventures. Looking at them, Joel figured it was time for her to step up her game and catch up to her successful friends. The party finally ended, and she got home totally exhausted, but her mom and sister were dying for all the deets. She hated being stuck in a loud crowd all night. Then her mom asked her straight up which guy she liked more, Ethel or Tus, but since Joel was totally torn, her mom just told her to have fun and flirt with both of them. Hearing that, her dad literally dropped his cake on the floor. He could not believe his daughter was juggling two guys at once. As soon as Joel was back in the social scene, she had a ton more on her plate on top of still studying magic. During one lecture, she had to tell the professors that their new formula wasn't adding up with the calculations. On weekdays, she was all in on the university project, and on weekends, she was hitting up parties with Tus, so people pretty much stopped gossiping about her and Tess. Right now, she was in class and her head was spinning from all the paperwork. That's when it hit her that she hadn't seen Tess in forever because of her crazy schedule. The girl had even been crashing in the lab for a few nights just to save time on the commute. Besides, the Emperor hadn't been bugging her either, so he must have been totally swamped too. Joel knew this research was her one-way ticket back to her own world, so she had to be laser-focused on it. A whole year just flew by, and suddenly it was time to get ready for the big celebration for the new year, and she totally got on it. But she was stressing big time, feeling like she was too chubby for any of the gorgeous outfits. Gwel had no clue that throwing huge parties was like a thing on New Year's Eve, probably because it was her first year living in the capital. Joel explained to her sis that in the capital they go all out with these massive fancy balls for the holiday, but back north it's the total opposite. And guess what? They were invited to this epic celebration at the palace that was gonna last for days. Then Gwel realized the holiday totally lined up with her older sister's birthday. And that's when it hit her she was way too young to go with them to the ball. So naturally she felt totally left out. It turned out Gwel was really feeling like an outsider in the capital, because Joel and her dad were always swamped, and now there were so many servants she couldn't even remember all their names. Joel just patted her sister's head and was like, "Hey, you just haven't gotten used to everything here yet." Yeah, they'd been missing out on all this for a super long time, but she'd get the hang of the changes soon enough. Gwel perked up a little and said she'd totally help her pick an outfit for his party. She reminded her sis about that gorgeous red brooch. Joel got that jewel for her 18th birthday and had been saving it for the perfect moment. So Joel went and got the brooch out of its box. Joel held the jewel thinking about the friend who'd given it to her, while Gwel dashed off to find the perfect dress to match. Her mind flashed back to the day she got it. It was snowing and she was completely wiped after training. Her teacher was looming over her, saying that in 10 years she still hadn't beaten him once. She had no idea how she was ever supposed to defeat a dragon like Bernard. Then the guy pointed his finger right at her and added that, hello, she was half-elf. And then he told her to brush the snow off and quit wasting time. Just then her mom swung open the door to the house and totally freaked when she saw the state of her. She rushed over to her daughter, checking her all over and asking if she was hurt. The woman asked the teacher if he was being way too hard on her daughter. He was like, nope, because she was the one who had asked him to teach her. Bernard thought the Duchess was being super overprotective of Joel, but to her mom she was still just a little kid. Joel actually first met the teacher 10 years ago on the main street of Valen back when she was helping some old lady. He was just chilling in a tree watching the whole thing and noticed she was way too quick for a normal human. Right then her mom and dad showed up, and it turned out this guy actually knew her mom. So now the two of them were arguing. He saw Joel as a grown-up, but to her mom Seal, she'd always be her little girl. The girl just watched them go at it, with a smile on her face. Then her father and Gwel came out with a cake they'd made just for her. She was slowly starting to settle into her new life, and then she got this gift. The whole family gathered around the table to wish Joel a happy birthday. She was so thankful for them, and then Gwel gave her a present. She wondered if her teacher got her anything, but he just snorted, all proud of himself. His big gift was letting her come over to his hut for some of his tea. Lame. At that moment, her mom started thinking that Bernard meant more to Joel than she did, even though she was the one who wanted a guy to teach her daughter. Turns out the real reason for all of Joel's training was because of some secret prophecy. Nobody in the family knew about it except for her mom and the teacher, so her mom totally cut him off. It was the first time in forever that Joel had seen her mother look that furious. Joel had no clue what he was talking about, but during that whole blow-up it was obvious it was about her. Then another one of her teachers, a guy named Book, showed up at the house with a present. And what else would a guy named Book bring but a book, specifically one about fire magic? He was positive this gift would come in handy for his student. And it was the perfect gift since she was seriously struggling with her fire magic. Book had even noticed it during their last lesson. It also turned out that Book was the son of that old woman she'd helped, and he was also the only mage in the entire city. Joel admitted that fire magic was just too hard for her, which kind of made sense since it was freezing all the time. She was really glad he was the one teaching her magic because the guy was the best mage she knew. But he didn't see himself that way since he didn't even have an official rank. Joel knew for a fact that all the mages in the Northern Empire were always taking exams at the Tower of Mages, so sometimes she got super curious about who Book really was. I mean, he had the skills of a top-tier mage, and right at that moment, the mage pulled out another gift. It was a red brooch, and he asked her to take it. The thing was absolutely beautiful. She was instantly in love with it. The whole piece was designed around a ruby, and Joel mentioned that it looked just like a ruby, but Book said he hadn't picked it out, so he couldn't be sure. And here's the crazy part. He only had this fuzzy memory of the person who gave him the jewelry in the first place. It just so happened that he'd run into some guy who begged him to pass on a gift to her. This dude was super insistent that he give the stone to the girl since no matter how much he wanted to do it himself, he just couldn't for some reason. But like he couldn't. So Joel asked her teacher to spill the deets on the dude. She was totally hoping it was a gift from Tess. But plot twist, Book's mind was a total blank on the guy's face. The master realized a memory wiping spell had been zapped on him. This info like completely blew Joel's mind. She knew it might not be the prince, so she tried to get some kind of clue out of Book. The only thing he could actually remember was that the guy was barely dressed for the cold, and even though he was smiling, he looked like he was about to burst into tears. Hearing that Joel realized Tess was here and just took off to find him, completely ignoring the chaos behind her as she bolted. She knew in her gut that only the prince would do something so ridiculously dramatic. It finally clicked the gift was from him. He had told her before that he'd never seen stones that mysterious, which is why she'd been studying it like crazy. She couldn't figure out a single thing about it, except that her heart totally broke into 1,000 pieces whenever she looked at it. It was like Tess was begging him not to forget her. She was dying to know what he was thinking when he gave it to her. The next day, the whole family was gathered around the table for breakfast. Everyone was digging in except Joel. Her dad immediately noticed she was in a funk. He got all worried that she was sick, but she promised she was fine. She admitted that if it wasn't for the New Year's ball, she'd have pulled an all-nighter at the university library. Her dad was so not happy that his daughter was pushing herself so hard with studying. He was getting all worked up until his wife calmed him down. Joel swore to him that her grades wouldn't mess with the family's reputation at all. The Duke was confused, like why was she bringing up their reputation when he was worried about something else entirely? Her mom knew exactly what was up, that Joel was running on fumes, trying to juggle everything. She'd seen her daughter practically collapse after a party more than once, only to get right back to work. Her parents were genuinely concerned. They knew their daughter was at her breaking point and were scared for her health. Joel knew her dad was just made minister, so she wanted to stay on top of all the high society gossip to help him out. But her mom and dad both thought she needed to share the load with them. I mean, they were a family. That's exactly why she wanted to get everything sorted out ahead of time, so she could go back to her own world with a clear conscience. Sure, she was used to this place, but she was still being haunted by nightmares from her past life. Right then, her train of thought was cut off by the Duchess. Her mom was super intuitive and totally figured out that Joel was still having bad dreams. Her dad, being his usual self, started to freak out and wanted to call a doctor immediately. But Joel just put on a smile and lied through her teeth, saying she was sleeping like a log and promised she'd stop working so much. Her dad bought it hook, line, and sinker, but her mom just stared at her with this look. Joel wondered why her mom was so happy about her suddenly hitting the party scene. It was simple, really. Her mom wanted her to meet a ton of guys to find the one. She was worried Joel might end up marrying that total slacker Bernard. Gail then jumped into the conversation. She was convinced her sister was into the chivalrous, quiet types. Joel had no idea where she got that from until she remembered this thing that happened last winter. She had helped some cute guy on the street. He totally wiped out and she helped him up and asked if he was okay, but the guy just grinned and said that thanks to her he was steady on his feet again. For a split second, Joel mistook him for Tess, and the guy was already asking her out for tea. Realizing it wasn't the prince, she tried to bail as fast as she could. The dude looked pretty bummed, but promised that if they ever met again, he'd totally owe her one. After saying that, the stranger took off. Back then, Joel couldn't stop staring at the guy, which is why Gail thought he was totally her type. The Duchess was suddenly super curious about him. His mom guessed he was an elf because his name ended with an L. The chill vibe at the table was nice, but Joel just wanted to go home ASAP, and not just because of the nightmares. The truth was, the more time she spent with them, the harder it would be to leave. The girl's dad sat on the edge of the bed, sighing. His wife came over and asked why he was so bummed out. She gently tried to figure out what was on her husband's mind. Seal hugged him and said he was her one and only, then gave Mayan a soft kiss on the forehead. He hugged her back and said he knew that. He was just remembering the awful nightmares that used to torture their daughter when she was little. Every single night she would cry and scream for them, terrified and in pain. Then for the first time she screamed in her sleep that she didn't want to die. That was why Mayan was so freaked out. The Duchess remembered it all too, and also how Joel would always try to calm them down instead. She never wanted them to worry about her, which just made the elf worry even more. All of a sudden, his wife recalled the time Joel was furious with Tess for not bringing them back to the capital right away when he became emperor. Seal had been so happy then, because for once, their daughter wasn't hiding how she felt. But as soon as they got back, Joel shut them out all over again. The elf admitted she regretted ever coming back to the capital and then said they had to protect their daughter from the imperial family no matter the cost. She knew Joel needed someone who would go to the ends of the earth for her. Mayan hugged his wife and told her not to stress, that it would all be okay. The emperor hadn't tried to see Joel lately, and she hadn't tried to see him. Finally, the night of the New Year's ball arrived, and all the fancy aristocrats flooded the palace. But for real, no one looked better than Joel. Her mom basically crowned her the star of the show since it was her birthday. Joel couldn't help but notice her mom was looking totally glam that day. Even though her dad hated these kinds of things, he promised he'd show up later. And true to his word, he did, looking seriously sharp. Everyone was staring at them, and Joel couldn't help but think about her totally impossible dream guy. The ballroom was packed. People were whispering about how the Duchess hadn't aged a day in like 14 years. Joel saw the massive effort her mom was putting in just to keep it together. Even though it had been forever since she'd been here, Joel knew this place hadn't changed one bit. Then all of a sudden, she spotted the painting and just froze. She'd only ever heard stories about it. It was this epic scene of how the Northern Empire was created, and that's when a crazy thought hit her. On the canvas, the god was painted in all black. Just then her mom walked over, and the emperor came over to meet them too. He was all apologies for not welcoming them back in the capital. He said he was so happy to see their whole family at his party. But then out of nowhere, her mom shoved her aside, shielding her with her own body, which was super weird. Joel figured it had to be a reaction to Tess's new look. The elf glanced at the other nobles and it hit her they were all totally brainwashed. Tess started his speech. Everyone was clapping for him, acting like they were in some kind of trance. He wrapped it up by saying it was time to party. He had everyone completely under his spell. Joel noticed the rose petals vanished the second they hit her hand. She realized the flowers weren't real. It was all just another one of the Emperor's illusions. And in that moment, it hit her the Tess she grew up with was gone. He was the Emperor now, not her childhood friend anymore. So she suggested her parents dance a little, and then they could just bounce. But the Emperor was watching her every move through the crowd. He saw Joel trying to lead her parents out, and he was not about to just let that happen. He stopped her, announcing that he remembered it was her birthday, and told everyone to wish her a happy one. The main character accepted the congratulations, but she'd already promised the first dance to her dad, not him. Still, Tess asked her for the first dance anyway. The girl had no idea how to react because he asked her to dance in front of literally everyone. It put her in a super awkward spot. She knew he did it on purpose. Joel was just about to say yes when her dad stepped in, saying that his daughter had promised him the first dance, and he asked the Emperor to let them have this moment. I mean, he'd been dreaming of dancing with his daughter at this ball forever, but Tess just said that tradition says young ladies should dance with guys their own age. The Duke knew that, but he wasn't backing down. The young man hinted that dancing with him would seriously boost her status in high society. That's when her mom, the elf, jumped into the argument, saying she was grateful to the Emperor, but her daughter was dancing with her father. Under Steele's pressure, the Emperor caved, but then he asked Joel to choose for herself. He just stood there staring her down, totally expecting her to say yes. She saw right through his sneaky move, but she said she was dancing with her dad. After she said that, the Emperor leaned in his lips like a millimeter from hers and whispered so only she could hear, "That brooch looks really good on you." Then he added, "Aren't you a little curious what kind of stone it is?" He promised he'd tell her all about the stone if she danced with him, and Joel was dying to know. It was total blackmail, and she just stood there staring at the Emperor's outstretched hand. Her curiosity totally won, and she placed her hand in his, completely going against her parents' wishes. Her mom demanded she come back right now, but Joel just gave her a sad little smile as she looked at the elf. Tess just smirked at Seal, saying she must have forgotten all the rules, and then he asked if she was acting this way because she was scared he'd hurt Joel. Then he swore that not a single hair on her daughter's head would be harmed. Her mom just listened, dead silent. After that, he basically dragged Joel onto the dance floor. Her parents just watched them, super worried. The music started up, and suddenly it was just Joel and Tess in the middle of the ballroom. He took her hand in his and started the dance. Right away, he noticed that she didn't look happy at all. So to get back at him, she stomped on his foot hard. It was only then that it seemed to click that she was mad at him. A second later, she mumbled that she wasn't a very good dancer. Hearing that, Tess scooped her up into his arms and told her to just follow his lead. At the same time, the guy looked so happy. He thought she was limitless sweet and basically a goddess. She couldn't believe he was actually going to carry her through the whole dance in his arms. Joel was freaking out that everyone was staring at them, but the Emperor just chuckled and shot an annoyed look at the crowd. Then rose petals started to fall again, and Joel just thought it was such a waste of energy and magic. Still, she'd never seen spells like that before, but she knew Tess only used them to mess with people's heads. The young man didn't think it was a big deal because, hey, it was her birthday. And then he added that if she was so worried about what other people thought, he could just wipe everyone's memory. The next thing she knew, he pulled her close and told her to only think about him. Tess promised he'd give her anything she ever wanted. Joel was suddenly super aware of his warm breath on her skin. This whole thing screamed that these games were going to blow up in her face one day. The girl turned to the Emperor and asked him to just tell her about the brooch already. The main character admitted she'd already done a ton of research, had no clue what kind of stone it was. The answer totally blew her mind. It was his actual heart. That kind of freaked her out, so Ule started demanding to know what was up, but he just kept saying the same thing. It was his real heart, the Emperor's heart. Joel had zero idea how much she actually meant to Tess. For Tess, his entire childhood was basically just a blur of constant pain. He couldn't deal with people, so he'd always just run off and hide, making the maids search everywhere for him. A lot of times, they'd find him passed out cold. Any kind of human interaction made him break out in a cold sweat. And even though nobody was trying to hurt him, the kid felt everything, on a whole other level. He'd yank himself away, begging them not to touch him. He would hide and plead for them to stay back. It literally hurt him to look at people, and any touch felt like fire, all because he could see other people's souls. Yeah, the kid was born with this power. Tess couldn't figure out what anyone was feeling because instead of their faces, he just saw these auras. It was like their souls were a mask covering up their real faces. He could only guess what his parents were feeling by how their auras shifted. That's why, just to be sure, he was always asking his mom if she was mad at him. The woman never knew how to handle her son acting like that. She'd always have to explain that no. She wasn't mad, just disappointed that he ditched his classes again and flipped out on the maid. She just didn't get why her son did this stuff. He'd just tell her he hated people. I mean, he knew better than anyone how greedy and two-faced they all were. It seriously felt like they were about to just swallow him whole. This answer really didn't fly with the Empress, especially since they had to fire and replace all the maids last time. She just called his reasons lame excuses. The kid was used to it, but he still kept insisting that all the different colored souls made his eyes hurt like crazy. He knew they didn't believe him, but it was the honest-to-God truth. Then the Empress actually agreed with him. The kid was so psyched that his mom finally believed him, and he looked right at her. Except she was totally lying. She smiled and lied straight to his face. She just thought it was another one of the little prince's tantrums, so she decided to just play along with him. She was already dreaming about marrying him off to the mayoress's daughter, but the boy just snapped and yelled that she was a total liar. Tess knew his mom was just faking it and didn't believe a word he said. That was the very first time he told her he could see right through her act. Even as a little kid, he knew that woman only wanted to use him, period. Her son's nerve totally ticked off the Empress, and she decided it was time to teach him some manners. Then she just turned her back and walked off, leaving Tess all alone in the hall. Later that night, she started sweet-talking her husband, saying it was time to give Tess a brother. The Emperor shut that down, worried about her health, but the Empress argued that their son wasn't getting any better, and the Empire needed a proper heir. The boy overheard that whole conversation as well as his dad hinting about a new friend for him. That's when they decided to set him up with Joelle, but back then he had no idea that this girl would be the one to finally get through to him. In reality, the whole seeing souls thing really sucks. One day this maid showed up at the palace with a hand puppet trying to be all buddy-buddy with the prince. She claimed she wanted to make friends with him and the puppet. But really, the Empress had promised a fat reward to anyone who could get the prince to crack a smile. The maid figured it'd be easy money. She'd just play with him for a bit and then cash in. But another maid had warned her it wasn't about him being a brat. It was something with his eyes. Right then, though, she just saw a normal kid and promised him she would always be on his team. The girl swore he could trust her, but that just made a weird little smile spread across the kid's face. Tess stared her down and straight up called her a liar. The maid couldn't believe what she was hearing, and the kid was already pointing right at her, saying she was lying through her teeth. The way he acted completely freaked out the maid, and she bolted, leaving him all by himself. That had to be a new record. After she left, the boy picked the puppet up off the floor, gave it a kiss, and muttered that he was so over all of this. After that whole disaster, the Emperor decided his son needed help making friends. To make that happen, he planned to introduce him to the daughter of a duke who was super loyal to the Empire. Plus, her dad kept saying that Tess and his daughter had a ton in common. It was the same girl the maids had been gossiping about lately. They all thought the two of them would be a perfect match. Back then, Tess couldn't have cared less what was so great about this girl, and no matter how much he did not want to go to this party, he was being forced to. To top it off, the Emperor said he wouldn't put up with his attitude anymore, and wouldn't let him upset his mother. This really bummed the kid out, since he wasn't just being difficult. That day it hit Tess all over again that his parents couldn't care less about his feelings. He only got praised when he did exactly what they wanted. He was so sick of the fakeness of everyone around him, especially his mom, who was only ever trying to get her way. Tess just couldn't understand how his dad could even love his mother. Nobody had a clue how completely tired the boy was of this soul-seeing curse. Just then the doors swung open. Guests started pouring into the hall, and that's when he saw her. Yule. He was totally blown away by how bright she was. For the first time in his entire life, the boy actually saw someone so clearly. The wild part was he couldn't see her soul at all. In that moment, he decided he was never ever letting her go because his world had been nothing but pain before she came along. She was like this ray of light in the darkness for him. After all, she was the only one he was ever a real friend to. Only she ever took care of him, wiped away his blood. He was sick all the time, but he'd never even heard of anyone in her family getting ill. Joelle was the one person who never wanted to hurt him, but she was always there for him. Tess was down to let her do whatever she wanted to him as long as he got to be by her side. The more they hung out, the more he started to get her, and one day it just hit him, he was majorly crushing on Joel. The prince was dreaming of their whole happily ever after thing, but it turned out she was into a totally different type of guy. And that was the day that Tess started obsessing over how to change his look. Joel was never into big parties, so she was already planning to ditch the next one. He thought it was so cool how Joel always knew her own vibe and what she wasn't into and just didn't care what anyone else thought. So one day they're just chilling in the living room, and he asks if she wants to play a game. Joel was down but told him to hold up till she finished her book. She ran her fingers through his hair and told him to wait a sec. Then she noticed his eyes were all red and got worried he was sick again. Her voice, her words, everything she did just made the prince's heart race. He told her that as long as she was right there with him, nothing could hurt him. That's why he was so into her. Joel was almost done with her book when she saw the guy yawning and figured he was totally sleep deprived. That wasn't the whole story, though. He'd had another seizure last night. After that, Joel just pulled him close and let him rest his head on her shoulder to sleep for a bit. Tess was so down for that. He wished that moment could last forever, and that she'd just fall for him right then. The only catch, Joel was into guys with dark hair. He stressed about it more and more every day because Joel could totally fall for some other dude and not him. Tess was terrified of becoming irrelevant to Joel, so he kept thinking about switching up his whole look. He knew he couldn't just change how he looked on his own, so it would almost be easier if Joel was just greedy like everyone else. Right then, his biggest fear was being left behind. Before, he didn't really care because he was always alone anyway, but now that Joel was in his life, he couldn't handle losing that. And right when Tess was about to lose it, a demon showed up. It offered to help him out. All he had to do was let the demon into his soul and his head. It was some god that people had totally forgotten about, and it offered him a deal. This dark being said it could even make Joel fall for him. The prince was about to say yes, but then he thought about how the girl would totally hate his decision. The guy got super creeped out when the entity started reading his mind. But it wasn't like that, so the deity decided to do him a solid and back off for a bit, but it was 100% sure the guy would be calling him back real soon. The prince was left alone in the room and he started getting a nosebleed from all the stress. After that day, he hit a major growth spurt, and then a bunch of stuff happened that made him finally decide to do whatever it took to make Joel his. And boom, the deity appeared again, offering the prince a deal. And in his most desperate moment, Tess agreed. But before that, the demon decided to spill the tea on the real history of his empire. Turns out Tess's ancestor didn't just make a pact with some random devil. Even though the first emperor had a hunch, he still made a deal. This unlocked secret magic knowledge and an endless supply of mana, which is how he crushed all his enemies. The devil's one condition was to mix its blood with the emperor's from then on. So now the devil's blood runs through all the descendants of the first emperor, but that demonic blood basically made them all go insane. It tortured and ate them up from the inside. In the end, they all had to die in darkness. Over time, the demon blood got weaker, but the new emperors kept asking for new deals. God was not a fan of this and gave humans a weapon to fight back against the devil. And that's how the Southern Empire got started. So basically, darkness ruled the north, and in the south you had this kingdom of light. It created a balance in the world, and the devil wanted Tess to mess it all up in its favor. This was the one and only condition from the Dark One. If he had to take someone out to get it done, he couldn't feel bad about it. Tess was now stressing that Joel's family got kicked out of the capital all because of him. The poor guy was crying over the letter, and the devil just loomed over him silent. The Dark One kept pushing that he had to get stronger to get what he wanted, and if they became one, then the devil would give him more power than he could ever imagine. And now, flash forward, Tess finally gets to see Joel and dance with her, but during the dance, he accidentally let it slip about the deal. The girl totally heard it and asked him to repeat himself. Tess didn't answer, and just dipped her into this gorgeous pose. The only thing that hadn't changed was how much he'd missed her. Being that close, the girl kinda stumbled a little and almost wiped out. Uhl was freaking out that rumors would start flying about them, but everyone was just mesmerized by the falling petals. But the emperor wasn't even thinking about his girl's parents, and the elf threw a magic shield over them and was super ticked at him. All of a sudden, Joel remembered that the guy still hadn't answered her question. She was trying to figure out what he meant when he said he had given her his heart. But she had no clue what that meant and asked why he didn't just give her the gift himself. Yeah, he missed her like crazy, but he was scared she'd get hurt. I mean, for 14 years, people were always trying to take him out, which was total news to her. The girl had no idea what went down in the capital after Tess's little brother was born. Everyone literally wanted him dead when he was just 12. His mother conspired with Duke Rant, and thugs were sent after him. Only the thugs ended up dead, and he survived, but that incident planted fear for her life in his heart. After that, Tess decided to become much stronger. Soon his father became very ill, and he also began to rule the empire, but the nobles continued to weave intrigues behind his back. They spread rumors about her family. Tess saw, by outing the traitors in the empire, all to keep himself and her safe. I mean, those people didn't just want him gone. They were totally against her relative even coming back to the capital. Because of that, all the conspirators were set to face the ultimate price. Tess was stressing that she'd totally hate him for what he did. Joel was just curious about how he'd changed so much, but told him he didn't have to spill if it hurt too much. Right then, the devil popped up out of nowhere and called Tess a total liar. Turns out there wasn't a single shred of truth to what the emperor said. Back during the assassination attempt, the guy was already way stronger than most veteran mages and knights, so his whole struggle was a lie, and he got all that power thanks to the devil. This crazy internal dialogue made him totally freeze up mid-dance, which obviously weirded her out. He gave zero explanation and just apologized to Joel. The devil even admitted that her face was seriously cute. The darkness whispered to him that if he kept zoning out, he was gonna lose Ule all over again. The devil was demanding the guy make her his right now. Tess screamed, begging the voice to shut up, which totally freaked out the main character. He had no choice but to make up an excuse, but Joel was already looking at him with a million questions. He claimed he had a headache, and she touched his forehead all concerned. She thought the emperor was definitely running a fever. The devil pushed Tess to just take her without a second thought. The guy grabbed her hand, but then her voice cut through. She said he was acting super weird. He promised the main character he was totally fine. Faking a killer headache, Tess started to bail. On the ballroom. Joel had no idea what was up with him. It was like the Emperor wasn't himself at all. The second Tess left, her parents rushed over completely worried about their daughter. Suddenly it clicked that the guy had looked sick even before that whole scene. She was worried about him, and for good reason. The Emperor himself knew he'd almost blown it big time. After New Year's, things kinda went back to normal, and Joel spent a ton of time with Gale in the garden. They picked fruit together, and it was so much fun. Gale didn't just put them in the basket, she ate them too. These trees used to be so small, but now they were actually getting a harvest from them. The younger sister grumbled that her big sis was always working and never noticed anything around her. The worst part was that Joel had even stopped playing with her. But the girl's research was going really well, so she started being home more often. That was awesome news, but Gale was just psyched that she'd be going to university too. That way they could see each other way more. That was probably a long shot since the academy and the lab were in completely different places, but she promised they'd make time for each other. Joelle could see how happy this made her sister. After all, the girl wouldn't have to be stuck at home by herself anymore. That's why she was literally counting down the days until the school year started. Joel had no idea her sister had been feeling so lonely this whole time. The main character was kinda alarmed because her sister never used to think like that. Before, all the focus was on Joel, and Gale basically grew up on her own. So now the girl realized she had to talk to her parents about it. Joelle knew it was all time's fault, just relentlessly ticking forward. Another year passed, but the girl's list of questions wasn't any shorter. The big one was whether she'd ever get to go back home. Then she remembered she wanted to bring Tess some fruit while he was stuck in the palace, going out of his mind with pain. He had to see her like immediately. But wanting something doesn't mean work just stops. Melon had just told him some sketchy activity was spotted on the border with the Southern Empire, which pretty much meant they had to gear up for war. Duke Rant also read the report and said they didn't have enough solid proof to make a move. This attitude totally enraged the Duke of Bonart. It was Duke Grantia and Duke Risdale who hated the UUL family the most, after all. Tess shut everyone up, wondering how long the Southern Empire's knights had been creeping around their borders. It had definitely been happening more and more lately. The Emperor knew exactly what the enemy's game was. They were pulling these drills just to keep Tess on a short leash. Only the whole thing was beyond stupid, and then the devil showed up again. He asked if the guy was seriously going to wait to be attacked. He demanded the Emperor just wipe out all their enemies. There was another problem at the border, freaking demons, and over the past 10 years they'd gotten way more dangerous. But the Emperor could only think about her eyes, the eyes that reminded him of Eula. Tess snapped back to reality. He knew if he gave in to his bloodlust, the devil would completely take over his body and mind, and it was all because Joel was back in the capital. The meeting totally wiped the Emperor out. After he asked Albert about Ule, and when he found out she was sparring with Ethel, he straight up shattered the glass in a cabinet. I mean, that knight was his old rival. The Emperor even admitted he'd hated the knight since they were kids. The guy was trying everything to make his rival back off from Ula. Tess knew that because she was so nice. The girl never said no to the guys around her. So he decided to deal with Tess and Ethel his own way. To top it off, it turned out Ule was coming to see the Emperor after lunch. The problem was he was only just hearing about it now. That evening, the guy was acting so wild the butler couldn't even give him the letter. Tess then remembered that he had for real lost control of his powers since then. No one was around when the Emperor asked Albert what he looked like. The butler didn't quite understand the Emperor, but he explained that he wanted to impress the girl. Joel had come in the evening so as not to draw attention to herself. Only now half of the inhabitants of the palace met her. Albert said that he would take her to the Emperor, although she wanted to go herself. After all, the Emperor was resting in his bedroom. Joel was also worried since Tess had been very ill before. The girl tried to hide her excitement for her friend. The butler immediately brought the girl to the Emperor's room. Joel took the man's performance at face value. The butler bowed out, and the girl began to straighten her friend's blanket. Albert suddenly remembered that the Emperor repeated the name of this girl every time in his delirium. The man left, realizing that the girl would have a very difficult time with the Emperor. Joel asked Tess to wake up. He was awake, and pulled the girl to him so that she fell on him. This behavior of the man worried and embarrassed Joel. Joel was 6 years old when she met Tess, but she was much older at heart. Then she saw a child in him, but now there was a man in front of her. A man with a damn cool body. She wanted to get off him, but suddenly he turned her on her side and pressed her to him. She had no strength to resist, so the girl decided to lie down with him like this. Joel wanted the Emperor to stop snuggling, but to no avail. His wet hair touched her bare skin, giving her an unusual sensation. The most interesting thing is that she liked these feelings. This sobered her up, and Joel decided to go home, but Tess held her tightly and asked her not to leave. At that moment she had déjà vu and the guy pretended to be asleep. Joel noticed that even the air between them had changed since her return, all because he turned from a boy into an adult man, and this could not leave her indifferent. At that moment, the girl caught herself thinking that she had never had a boyfriend, but now she wanted to fall asleep next to Tess. But then she realized that she could not do it after all because of such an impulse. Hell would await her at home. So she tried to wake up the guy. She didn't want to throw him off the bed, but he didn't leave her much choice at that moment. Tess stopped pretending and said that he missed her very much. Then he kissed her hand. The guy was happy. Joel saw this but tried to get him to stop embarrassing her, and then she pulled his hair sharply, because she didn't like that he called her cruel. Tess was a little offended, but glad that he was alive. Joel complained that he squeezed her in his arms, and he smiled and asked her if she liked it or not. She did not answer and asked him to button her shirt. It seemed very rude to him, but Ule didn't pay attention. The Emperor was glad that his plan worked. After all, the girl was very embarrassed. He wanted to see how her face would change during the kiss. Tess knew he couldn't be in a hurry, so he decided to bewitch her gradually. He hoped that when she fell in love with him, he would take her, all for himself, and not give her to anyone. The Emperor was pleased that the girl brought him fruit, and then he added that for a moment he doubted it since she was too detached. Nevertheless, she was the only one who visited him when he was ill. Joel did not understand his hints, and said that he was capricious because he was offended. The fact is that in childhood the Emperor threw such tantrums at her. Suddenly he was distorted. He did not understand what she had put in his mouth. These were fruits from her garden which were quite delicious. It turned out that the tree from their childhood gave its fruits this year, and since they walked under it together, the girl decided to treat the man with its fruits. After all, it was he who asked the gardener to take care of this tree. Therefore, the girl treated him to the first harvest. The guy understood that the harder he tried to seduce her, the more she ran away from him. When he took a step forward toward her, she took a step back from him. As soon as he thought she was in his hands, she slipped like sand through his fingers. Therefore, only now did he notice that he was completely at her mercy. The most interesting thing is that the girl did not even know about it. He continued to fool around, then asked to feed himself, then to take him in his arms, all because he had been feeling very pathetic. Lately, like he felt lonely, and practically did not get out of bed. Such speeches played a role, and Joelle conceded. The girl sat down on the bed, and the guy put his head on her lap, and so they sat. Now he was happy, because although she did not want to go to bed with him, it was already good to sit. The Emperor wondered how long she would pretend that she did not understand or notice anything. If she had only asked, he would have gladly knelt before her. Joel herself knew perfectly well what he was talking about. Tess was satisfied with absolutely everything as long as she was by his side. After all, sitting like this is already a great happiness for him. Joel reminded him that this was a one-time action. She did it only because he was sick. Tess himself knew this very well, and this understanding made him cling to her. Because of his feelings, he reacted to every word thrown to her, and this realization was the birth of new feelings inside Joel's heart. Still, she was hoping this whole thing would just blow over. But if it didn't, she was pretty sure she'd totally drown in all this drama. On top of that, she'd basically figured out how to crack open the door between worlds. Tess went to bed, and Joelle pulled the covers over him, hit with the fact that her nightmares were just screaming that she so didn't belong here. She was about to dip, but then it hit her that she had to remember she had to bounce from this world. Now he was left all alone in the room. UUL was planning on staying out of the drama, but that all changed when Lily started going after her little sister. Lily was straight up shaming Gale when, at that exact moment, UL showed up behind them. She called out the Marquis's daughter by name. Joel was radiating pure rage and Lily totally felt it. The girl just stared back at her looking like a deer in headlights. Joel tried to chill out, but it wasn't really working. I mean, how was anyone supposed to stay calm in a situation like this? Earlier, while Joel was busy in the lab, she'd gotten a letter from Tess, saying he couldn't be her date to the ball. This totally threw her for a loop because now she had no idea who to go with. It all happened because she'd been so zoned in on her work that she hadn't been paying attention to anything else. Asking Ethel was a no-go too since he was swamped. Both things happening at once felt super sketchy to her, and that's when it hit her. Tess was probably behind all of this. Joel figured whatever she could just roll up to the ball solo. She tried to not get mixed up in the drama and just focus on her work, but then a question popped up in her research, and she decided to go ask the professor for some advice. Her colleagues had noticed she was basically living in the lab, and that's when she caught the whole scene of Lily humiliating. Even then she didn't want to get involved, but one look at her sister's face, and she knew she couldn't just stand by. She called Gale over to her and then turned on Lily demanding answers. She needed to know exactly what this girl was doing to her sister. The Marquis's daughter tried to spin it like she was just giving the new girl some advice. She pressured Gale, trying to force her to back up the story. The poor girl just looked at her sister and said Lily didn't do anything wrong, begging UL to just go home and let it go. The main character could tell her sister was totally terrified, but she'd seen the whole thing with her own eyes, so she wasn't buying their story for a second. But she realized right then that the Marquis's daughter hadn't learned a single thing from last time. Joel instantly kicked herself for being so checked out, then she gently squeezed her sister's hand and promised everything would be okay. She gave her sister a kiss and said they were going home, then asked Gale to wait for her in the carriage. It was just a precaution. Gale scrambled into the carriage, leaving Joel standing in front of Lily. Now the main character's whole vibe changed, because she knew this wasn't the first time her sister had put up with this kind of crap. Lily tried to talk back but got slapped right across the face. After the first one, Lily just looked stunned, so she got another. Now the girl was on the ground totally in shock, and with a bleeding lip. Joelle warned her that she wouldn't be so nice next time. The main character made it crystal clear that if she hadn't put in a good word with the Emperor for Lily, she'd have been left to rot in some cell. It turns out the Marquise's daughter's little posse had no clue that Joel was the one who saved their friend. Lily refused to believe it and just kept running her mouth about the main character, who just said she wasn't about to put up with it. On top of that, Yuo was a half-elf, and usually kept her real power under wraps, but she was willing to make an exception just for Lady Xuan. After that, she demanded Lily's friends tell her their names. The girls introduced themselves, and then had to spill the tea on what really went down. Apparently, Yuo just hadn't greeted Lily first today, and got an earful for it. To Joel, this was so not a big deal, and she couldn't wrap her head around how someone could be humiliated over it. That kind of nasty behavior totally set Yuo off. The Marquis's daughter started screaming and threatening to tell her dad, reminding everyone that she was the future empress. Joel had seriously forgotten she was dealing with a spoiled brat, not an actual lady. The only thing was, Lily had no idea how her own dad had been on his knees begging the main character to save her. Joel kept going, saying the man was ready to kiss the ground she walked on that day, and that was the only reason she felt bad for him, and personally asked the Emperor on the girl's behalf. So Lily needed to get it through her head that she was only breathing because Joel allowed it, but Lady Jen wasn't buying it. Yuel didn't really care, and what was actually hilarious was how sure this girl was that she'd marry the Emperor. Because let's be real, from when they were kids, till now Tess had always been hers. You should have seen how Lily's face totally twisted up after hearing that. The girl was done with this conversation and laid it out: either Lily apologizes or she's done for. It was basically not a choice at all. After that, she headed to the carriage where her sister was waiting. Gail was totally freaking out about her big sister because she was taking forever. She was starting to think that something bad had happened to Joel. The servant was begging her to calm down, but she just couldn't. She was imagining their mom and dad getting into a huge fight over this whole mess. Just then, Joel showed up, and Gail threw her arms around her. The little one was just sobbing, burying her face in her big sister's dress. It was sweet, but she really didn't need to get so worked up over her. After a moment, she gently wiped her sister's tears away. But then Gail pulled back, asking if Joel was just going to stay at the lab again. Joel didn't know what to say, because that was totally her original plan. But then it hit her how much her sister really missed her. They were a tight family, but their dad worked a ton, and their mom didn't always get how things worked with people. So basically, Gail could only really count on her. So Joel promised she'd start coming home more often. It felt like the right move, especially since the time would come when she'd have to go back to her own world, and until then she had to step up for your sister, and that meant she needed backup. And that backup just happened to be Tess. He was totally surprised to see her, but like in a good way. She was all proper and polite, not that he cared about that stuff. She was strictly business, though keeping things professional. She asked him to be her date to a ball at Duke Rant's place. For real, this was something he'd only ever dreamed about, so he was totally floored. Joel's whole plan was to boost her sister's rep with the popular crowd. She thought about what Guel was going through. She kinda got Lily, but she just couldn't figure out why the other girls from the less important families were going along with it. Then it clicked: kids have their own social ladder, and to climb it they need to boost their status. Their parents throw these fancy tea parties to help them network, but since they were in exile for so long, they totally missed out on that whole tradition. So now to play catch-up, she needed Tess's help. Meanwhile, the Emperor's advisors were totally eavesdropping, but he shot them a look that screamed, "You're gonna regret this!" Joel knew this wasn't gonna work, so she just grabbed the Emperor and pulled him away, and he actually went with it. They ended up hiding under the stairs. She knew she was being super bold, but what was done was done. Joel confessed this was all for her sister and begged him to just hear her out, but first she asked him to back up a little. Tess didn't budge, totally getting that she was trying to use him. And the craziest part, he was totally okay with it. This threw Joel for a loop because it seemed like he wasn't even listening to her plan. The details didn't matter to him, as long as it was Joel he was in, and then he asked her to be his date to the ball again. The Emperor told her not to sweat it, promising he always paid attention to her. He even remembered the no kissing on the lips without permission rule. Then he teased that this was what she secretly wanted, which made her blush like crazy. So she calmly asked him again. The request was still on the table, and the Emperor was totally pleased with that. Honestly, she had no idea why he was so into it. He didn't explain, just waited for her to spill the tea on why she needed him for the ball. Once things calmed down, she told him everything that was going down with Guel. She was scared he'd judge her or something, but the guy was actually super thoughtful about it. The Emperor couldn't believe how much she really cared about her sister. Tess totally got why Joel was scared. He knew that by asking him to the ball, she was basically making a public announcement about how close they were. She knew exactly how it looked, which is why she apologized. She felt so guilty for using him like this, even if it was for her sister. But this was actually perfect for him, because for her he would literally get on his knees at her feet. The Emperor basically gave her permission to use him. Seriously, he'd do anything for her if it meant winning her over. That's when she noticed his eyes looked way darker than usual. And then he asked for a kiss. He said he'd been a good boy this whole time and totally deserved a reward. And just like that, for the first time in her 2 lives, she kissed a guy. She was so not ready for this, but one kiss was not enough for Tess, and he just kept kissing her. It felt unreal, but was totally stunned, and Tess said for like the 100th time that he loved her. That's why he just couldn't hold back anymore, but he wouldn't push it unless she was into it too. In that moment, Joelle realized she was completely lost in all these new feelings. Still, part of her was screaming to stop this craziness, but honestly, the kiss was amazing. She realized that the longer she stared at him, the more flustered she got. So throwing common sense out the window, she just kissed him again. The second she got home, she fessed up that she'd made a huge mistake. The elf didn't even seem surprised. Her mom had no idea just how bad things really were. Joelle asked where her sister was, and when she heard Gwell was playing with the maids, she knew it was time for a serious talk with her mom. She told her that she saw some people giving her sister a really hard time at the academy, but the worst part was that it had been going on for more than just one day. Her mom instantly started freaking out, but Joelle begged her to just listen to her for a sec. Joelle laid it all out for her mom, and then added that she'd already handled it. It was then that Seal realized for the first time that this was on her all, because she hadn't been paying enough attention to her youngest daughter. She couldn't figure out why her daughter never said anything to her. It was all because her parents were so hyper-focused on Joelle, and Joelle knew that the more attention she got, the less her sister received. Joelle said that she was basically grown up, and it was time to focus on Gwell, but the real problem was something else entirely. Her mom started thinking about her own childhood and her oldest daughter's nightmares. Joelle had no clue what was going on with her mom, but she just smiled and said everything was fine. Her mom promised she would totally take care of the situation with, well, but Joelle insisted she had it all under control. That's when Seal started to get seriously worried. Then she added that she'd always worry more about Joelle than her sister. Joelle was shocked since it was the first time the Duchess had ever been that real about it. Everything was cool until the day they had to go to the ball at Duke Rant's place. The Emperor himself met the girls there. The whole thing was super extra. The girls said hi to him. Joelle knew Tess had been prepping for this meeting for ages. Gel was pretty much clueless about what was happening around her. Tess tried to spill the beans to the girl, but Joelle just coughed. Uhl totally blushed remembering their little state meeting under the stairs, and then gave her sister a look to do her thing. Gwell got the hint and introduced herself to the Emperor, all formal and proper. Gel was usually a total free spirit, but even she could tell there was a serious vibe between the Emperor and her sister. Turns out that was like the hot gossip at the academy. The Emperor kind of snorted cause yeah, Lily wasn't wrong about that. So Tess had a surprise for Gwell. This super cute knight walked up to be her escort for the night. Ula was totally shocked by this move from the Emperor. Tess kept bugging Joel about their kiss, and Joel was like, dude, don't bring that up, we promised to just forget it ever happened. She had played it off like it was just payment for a favor. She knew he'd totally latch onto that, but he actually dropped it and just asked her to think about why he was so into her. Joel shot back that he'd promised to wait for her. Meanwhile, Gwell was totally vibing with her new acquaintance. The guys helped them into the carriage, and Gwell was seriously impressed with how amazing Duke Rath's estate looked. Joel had to remind her sister to be on her best behavior, but Tess told her to chill out since Gwell had her own personal guard. For the whole evening, Gwell was like, I got this, sis. Joel was already feeling drained, and they hadn't even made it inside yet. Gwell just knew the courtyard was decorated beautifully. Tess was already trying to get Joel to visit his place and bring her sister along. Joel was so not into that idea, but her sister was practically begging her to go. So Joel gave in, but on one condition: her sister had to actually make a friend tonight. She was hoping that since it wasn't some stuffy official party, they wouldn't run into any drama. Joel was just hoping that puffy-cheeked Lily wouldn't show her face, and the Emperor was like, no way she's coming. Then he decided to drop some wisdom on Gwell. Don't just trim the weeds or you'll never get rid of them. You gotta rip them out by the roots. Right then, Uli got this feeling the Emperor was plotting something, and just as they walked into the hall, Toos and Lily were right there waiting for them. The girl came over with a big red puffy cheek and said hi. Joel had been praying for a normal party, but yeah, that was not happening. Literally every single person was staring at them. Tess told everyone to look away since he was just there as her +1. Joel hoped it was just a regular dinner, but even the heads of major noble families were here. Tess swore he didn't plan any of it. He just mentioned it out loud, and well, this happened. So Gwell started mingling with the other teens, and Ule couldn't help but smile watching her. She was just so glad to see her sister looking happy again. So far, everything was going super well, so of course the Emperor tried to get her to ditch with him, complaining he was bored. Joel was like, no way, and shoved him off. She acted all hurt by it, and she just clutched her head like, how is anyone supposed to deal with that much cuteness? It hit her, then she was a goner. This was definitely love. At that exact moment, Marquis Schwen and Lily walked up. It was a super awkward silent showdown that everyone was watching. Uhl was low-key glad to see them because it snapped her out of her love-struck haze. Tess gave Lily a death glare like she was public enemy #1. The Marquis started apologizing for his daughter's awful behavior. Ulu just stayed quiet, not about to accept some fake apology, especially since Lily hadn't even bothered to greet the people she'd insulted. But since the girl clearly had no manners, Tess decided to school her a little. The Marquis knew this was about to blow up and forced his daughter to bow and ask for forgiveness. Just then, Gwell ran up to her sister and grabbed onto Joel's dress. Joel could tell her little sis was freaked out, so she turned to Tess. She said that neither she nor Gwell needed Lily's apology. This was Gwell's first ever ball, and she wasn't going to let anyone ruin the vibe. But she did hope Lady Lily had learned her lesson, and that she also wouldn't go around calling herself the future Empress with zero reason to. Tess was 100% on board with that. The room exploded with whispers. A really cute blonde guy was watching the whole thing go down. The drama was over and Joel ducked out since a huge crowd was swarming Tess. She barely managed to sneak away. Joel was just trying to get some space, but even in a quiet corner of the park there was that same cute blonde guy. His whole vibe was a little strange, but he also looked like he couldn't wait for the night to be over. Then she recognized him. It was Dr. Worthingblest. He looked shocked that she knew who he was. Joel was totally starstruck. His thesis was literally the reason magic was now considered a real science. The guy was her hero, so she just started bombarding him with questions. She even showed him her calculations, thinking she must have messed up because the results she got for the Mana Surge's location and timing were seriously freaking her out. Her numbers were spot on and pointed to living things being the cause of the storms. They totally geeked out over the formulas, and after he walked her through it, things started to click for Joel. The man was convinced she was the one who should take over his research. After all, she was smart, didn't back down, and worked her butt off, and her out-of-the-box thinking totally blew his mind. Joel was confused, like how did he even know her name? So they officially introduced themselves. He was just as confused about how she recognized him. Joel confessed she'd seen his picture before. Then it turned out the doctor was related to Duke Rathus, but he asked her to keep it on the down low. Keep this on the DL. Joel, like totally starstruck, asked to meet up at the cafe. The girl was down to keep talking about it. He actually had to think about it for a second. Joel was freaking out. Her literal idol had agreed to hang out. And of course Tess saw the whole thing go down. The car ride home with Tess was dead silent. Joel knew something was seriously off because the entire drive home, the Emperor was just brooding in the corner. She was kind of worried he'd try something, but he kept his distance. She figured Tess had to be mad at her about something, but he was like, that's crazy. He said she was like the most important thing to him, and it totally crushed him that she'd say something so harsh. Joel knew that one look from him made her freeze up, and then this crazy wave of desire just hit her. Meanwhile, Tess confessed he was actually super scared. He was terrified she'd fall for the blonde guy and just leave him. She couldn't wrap her head around how he could love her that much, and how he was so completely hers. For him it was simple, she was his entire world. And in that moment, she just kissed him. After a couple minutes, though, he totally took the lead. And with every second that passed, it got harder and harder for Tess to hold back. So she broke the kiss. He begged her not to push him away. The Emperor, typical, completely misunderstood the situation. Joel looked right into his eyes and was like, dude, I broke it off because I literally couldn't breathe. I mean, it was kind of his fault. He didn't have to kiss her so hard he cut off her air supply. Plus, it was only like her second kiss ever. Tess was so happy that Joel was still new to this whole kissing thing. The Emperor said she always seemed so perfect to him, but right now she was just so cute, and he asked her to only be like that with him. Joel told Tess to wipe his tears, that everything was okay. She honestly didn't get his whole vibe or even what love was supposed to feel like. But at the same time, she couldn't pull away from his lips. Later, chilling at home, Joel started to realize she was scared to feel the same way back. Besides, how was she supposed to know if she really loved Tess? She was so lost in her thoughts, she totally zoned out on Oren. Her friend came over to spill some tea, but no one was even listening. The big news was that her friend was now the head of the Shren family. Oren confessed that when her dad found out Joel demanded an apology from Lily, he freaked out. He knew his youngest daughter could be in some serious trouble this time. After a private chat, the Emperor basically gave her an ultimatum: either take over the family or lose everything. Everyone was so sure that Tus would become the head of the Zen family, but he totally messed up and lost the Emperor's support. Joel could tell her friend wasn't happy about it, but her stress was about something else entirely. Irene was in love with Knight, but now that she was head of the clan, it was super unlikely they could ever be together. After all, her future husband would have to join her family and give up his own last name. Plus, she wasn't even sure if he felt the same way, and she didn't know if she could give up her title for him. So she was just gonna find some other guy to marry, because she didn't believe in that forever love stuff anymore. Then she asked if Joel knew why her dad was so obsessed with Lily. The answer was simple. She was his mistress's daughter. Irene's dad tried to keep it a secret, but it all came out. And because of that, Irene just stopped believing in love. Joel totally got it, because she was running from love for the exact same reason. Except now she was actually falling for the Emperor, but she kept having these awful nightmares. And right then she heard Tess's voice in her dream. She woke up with a jolt and saw him sitting by her bed. He just hugged her and told her it was okay. She had no idea how he even got there. Tess just smiled and said he was always with her. They just sat there on the bed holding each other. For like the 100th time, Joel asked if his feelings were for real. He said yes, of course, but then suddenly, his whole vibe shifted. He accused her of playing him and planning to ditch him. He claimed she didn't care about his feelings at all, and was only focused on getting back to her own world. Then this, dark version of herself showed up telling her she was just lying to herself. That deep down she was totally planning to bail the second the gates between worlds opened. This other Joel said she was a coward. And then poof, everything vanished and she was all alone in her room. She realized it was all just another nightmare. Joel was so over it. She just wanted it all to stop. After that, she went to meet up with Dr. Bless. She said sorry for being late, explaining she had to take the long way to avoid being seen. He was cool with it, saying he hadn't been waiting long, and a book is always good company. The scientist admitted he really wanted to see her and pick up where they left off. He was looking extra sharp today, all dressed up with his hair perfectly styled. Seeing that, she figured she'd just dive right in. They started nerding out about different formulas and theories. Bless didn't get why she was so obsessed with this research. For him it was a passion project that made him happy, but he could tell she didn't look happy at all. She told him it was because she wanted to travel between worlds. That's why she started studying Manaverse. They could potentially open the gates between worlds. And because of that, she was starting to get super impatient. Bless suddenly remembered hearing about something just like that. Joel wanted to figure out exactly where the next mana surge would hit so she could catch the magical storm. On top of that, she'd snagged copies of some top-secret files from the Imperial Library. This stuff totally blew the scientist's mind. He was convinced that trips like that were actually possible. They were possible, but nobody had actually proven it. The scientist dude was staring at the papers, totally clueless about what she was after, but he was rooting for her to find it. Joel was too, even with Tessa on his mind. Joel's own past came flooding back. She'd gotten this call recently, something about the dad her mom had split with. And of course our girl just happened to overhear the whole thing. Then her own mom called right then and she had to be like, yeah, I'm heading home now. After that trip down memory lane, Joel knew she had to end things with Tess. This time she brought Gale along. The Emperor had all these awesome toys and dolls waiting for the little girl. And get this, she could take literally anything she wanted, all because she was Joel's sister. He totally clocked the girl's weird vibe. Gale could feel the awkward tension between them too. For Joel, this whole visit was a total shock. She had no idea they were even coming, so she felt super embarrassed. But honestly, it was her own fault for completely zoning out what her sister was saying in the carriage. It was obvious to her sis that Joel had been acting so strange lately. Right then, Tess suggested they go for a walk, but she shot him down using the excuse that she had to watch her sister. The Emperor was not taking no for an answer, saying Gale could just play with the maids. He was so sure she had something she needed to tell him. After thinking for a sec, Joel gave in and they walked through the garden in complete heavy silence. She knew she had to rip the band-aid off, but she just couldn't make herself do it. Tess couldn't stand the quiet anymore and just pulled her into a hug. In that moment, she realized she had no clue what to do. He seemed so vulnerable, and she wasn't sure if she had the guts to push him away. But then Joel remembered she'd found a way home, so she steeled herself and shoved the guy away. It was a heart-wrenching decision, but she had to draw the line. He immediately thought he'd done something wrong, but the problem was so much deeper. Joel couldn't just tell him the truth about who she really was or where she was from, and she just couldn't even look at him right now. She couldn't face him while her heart was breaking and tears were streaming down her face, and then it started to rain and she was just drowning in guilt, over her mom and over Tess. Without even looking back, she just walked away. The guy just stood there watching her go, begging her not to leave. But Joel couldn't risk it. She couldn't stop now, so she lied, telling him she didn't like him anymore. But he still loved her, and hearing him say that just made her cry harder. He couldn't take it anymore and just wrapped her in his arms. She didn't want to make things even more complicated. Meanwhile, Bless was deep in his research, and finally found the answer to Joel's question. The next magic storm was supposed to hit Mount Guana. At that exact moment, Tess was kissing Joel in the rain. Finally, the Emperor broke the kiss but didn't let her go. He could see just as much pain in her eyes as he felt in his own. She was crying too. That's when he knew their feelings were totally mutual, so they just held each other. After that day, a lot of things changed. She started going to meetings with the noble families, and the whole high society scene found out about their love story. After that, the mean kids at the academy finally left Gale alone. She even made some friends, and just looked 1,000,000 times happier than before. Orin basically swore her loyalty to Tess. She wasn't about to bail on him like the rest of her family, but the biggest change of all was her relationship with Tess. He was super open with his feelings in public, which she was not a fan of, but behind closed doors it was a totally different story. Joel being so cold in front of everyone really hurt the Emperor. The girl, like always, was freaked out by rumors, so for now she wanted to keep their relationship on the down low. The guy helped her with the book and promised he would keep their thing a secret. The Emperor promised he wouldn't do anything to make her uncomfortable, and then he literally knelt in front of her. He was just so happy they were together. In that moment Tess literally could not believe his ears. She got a little ticked off since it wasn't her style to joke about stuff like that. He only asked again because he was so insanely happy, and then they sealed the deal with a kiss. Joelle left the library thinking that even though she liked kissing, she still couldn't quite get used to it. Guel was already waiting for her in the carriage. All of a sudden, Joelle noticed her sister was only holding one toy, even though she'd brought two with her. The reason was simple. Guel met a fairy in the garden and gave her one. She said it was a gorgeous blue-eyed fairy. The girls got home, but right when the maid tried to help Joelle with her books, she got zapped by some kind of protective magic. Her mom made it obvious she knew her daughters had been at the palace and she was not happy about it. Joelle lied, saying she just ran to the Imperial Library for a minute to grab some books for a project. After that, the elf decided it was time for a serious talk with her daughter. Mom and daughter were alone in the study. Joelle was super nervous. Then her mom pulled out an envelope full of papers. They were basically profiles of a bunch of eligible guys. Joelle had no idea why she was being shown all this. The whole point was that Joelle needed to get married. She tried to tell her mom she was way too busy with her studies, but the elf wasn't buying it. Her mother knew that her daughter had been hanging out at the palace even though the university had plenty of books. Joelle promised her mom she didn't need to worry that she was smart and could handle anything. But her mom knew. Her daughter was totally lying, but she let her do what she wanted anyway. The woman wanted to spill the whole truth, but she was trapped by some non-disclosure oath she couldn't break. Meanwhile, Joelle decided to hop in the bath. She totally knew her mom wasn't a fan of Tess. Like, when they were kids, her mom was super nice to the Emperor, but now the whole vibe had shifted and she had zero clue why. But honestly, to Joel, Tess hadn't changed one bit. The next morning, the whole fam was at the breakfast table. Everything was super chill and quiet. Then the girls headed off to class. And that's when things got interesting. The rector invited Dr. Bless to give a lecture. Everyone was totally stoked, and then the guy actually winked at Joel. Winking was so not his vibe, so she felt kinda awkward. Like, every single student was dying to ask the scientist a question. Joel realized Bless had gotten super popular with everyone like overnight, but trying to actually run the lecture was a total nightmare. And the guy looked totally wiped. She was surprised they even ran into each other at the academy. Joel kinda teased him since he'd basically signed himself up for this mess, but Bless was actually looking for her because he had some major info. He told her exactly where the magic storm was gonna go down. This was so out of the blue for her, and then he gave her the key to his lab and asked her to be his assistant. She knew Mount Guana was super mysterious. Part of it was always covered in this weird fog that nobody could explain, and only someone with a ton of mana could climb it. And that's supposedly where the gates to her own world would open. It all sounded great, except she had no idea how to actually open the gate or where it even went. Her whole life here, she'd been searching for a way home, but because of Tess, her life in this world finally started to mean something, and now she was visiting the Emperor. He hadn't seen her in forever, so he was totally thrilled. He was wondering why she'd been so MIA. She just said her schedule was insane, but Tess mentioned he'd written her a bunch of letters and never got a reply to a single one. Joel figured it was better to talk face to face, especially since she had a new project in the works. The Emperor kissed her hand, telling her she was such a go-getter. Then he admitted he just wanted to spend at least one day with her. And then he kissed her. Right then, a servant knocked on the door. Tess sent him away, saying he'd take care of it himself. Joel's eyes went wide. There was a crazy amount of sweets on the table. The Imperial Palace chef had made all of her absolute favorite desserts. She gave Tess a super genuine thank you. And then it was time to dig in. The Emperor didn't just buy them. He'd hired a personal pastry chef, and dude, it was totally worth it. Low-key, though, the guy was curious about who Joel had been hanging out with. But he decided to hold back from asking. The next day, Joel showed up at Dr. Bless's lab. The guy was happy to see her. Her first task was to sort a bunch of documents, and after basically dumping all the work on her, he totally bailed. Joel didn't just help Bless in the lab, but in his lectures too. Not all the students were getting it right away, so Joel stepped in to help them out. She was a total natural at breaking down the material and giving legit useful advice. That's when the professor realized how awesome it was to have a solid assistant. Plus, she totally crushed the document sorting. Later, Joel went to find the guy. She had a letter for him and then made it clear they weren't going to be all informal. Then things got even more interesting. All the students kept asking her if the professor was married or if he had a girlfriend. The guy just laughed it off, but then he asked her if she was seeing anyone. She didn't answer, and he was kind of hoping she was single. Besides studying, Joel kept up with her fencing practice. Ethel could barely handle her attacks. Joel could tell her friend was seriously off his game. This was definitely not the sparring session she was hoping for. He knew he just couldn't get his head in the game, so he suggested they just call it a day. She walked over to her friend and offered him a hand up. She wanted to figure out what was wrong and help. After all, she was just as good at listening as she was at fencing. So they ended up in his office with some whiskey. The guy knew that Oren would probably hang out with him way less now that she was a Marchioness, and that thought was seriously bumming him out. He ran into her at the palace and tried to say hi, but she basically blew him off. To make it worse, she was flirting with Lord Bellic right then and there. The whole thing was driving the guy insane, and Joel just listened while Ethel vented. And then she told her friend he should just talk to Oren directly about it. Joel really thought it was the best move. Plus, he could get the scoop on the guy she was hanging out with. Ethel thought that was a good idea. That evening after her training, Joel got home. Her sister, who was reading a book, met her at the door. She immediately noticed that Joel smelled like she'd been drinking, even though she was supposed to be at practice. Joel just gave her sister a huge hug, telling her she loved her so much. Turns out after their training, Ethel had gotten super wasted and asked her to forgive him for everything that went down between them, and especially for the fact that neither he nor his dad could stand up to the Emperor. That was still eating him up inside, so he apologized for being so weak. Joel wasn't holding any grudges, so she just gave him a comforting pat on the back. And that's pretty much where they left it. Too bad she had absolutely no clue about the hurricane of feelings swirling inside her friend. All of a sudden, a huge downpour started. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Tess was losing it again. He was totally flipping out that Joel had made time to train and party with Ethel. He decided to just pull an all-nighter. The next day, Joelle was in class. At the end of one lecture, the professor suggested their group plant a special tree. She was the only one who actually wanted to do it. Joelle promised she'd take amazing care of the plant. Looking at the flowers, she just knew she had seriously lucked out. The professor was also psyched that his little charm was in good hands, and then he asked her for a favor to take a certain book to the temple for him. The guy said the book belonged in the temple, not in their library. It was literally the first time in her life Joelle had ever held a book this ancient. The temple was built to honor the god of light lux. Shrines to him were pretty much all over the world. She couldn't satisfy her curiosity since the book was in some ancient language, but the pictures were super clear, and right now the devil himself was staring back at her from the page. Meanwhile, Bless was practicing how he was going to ask the girl to the ball, but every version he came up with sounded totally lame. Right then, Joelle burst into the lab. She was frantically looking for something on his desk, and the guy had no idea what to do with himself. And just like that, she found what she was looking for, saying she was just borrowing it for a little while. It was some kind of magical translator. The poor guy had no clue what just happened. Like at all. And Joelle didn't even try to explain. She had super urgent business, so she just bounced without listening to Bless. Joelle knew this book was a huge deal. And back at her place she had been, trying to read the thing for over an hour. But instead of actual words, all she could see under a magnifying glass was a totally black page. She let out a tired sigh. She just couldn't read the tome. And that's why she ended up at the church. Joelle went to the temple instead of just dropping the book off and leaving all because they only showed her the way to the library, but she couldn't find the actual room. Yet. Suddenly she spotted this gorgeous painting of Lux. It totally wowed her. Just then, another temple servant came out to meet her. He was a young guy with long white hair. His name was Callus. And he came over to help Joelle out. The girl admitted she was obsessed with the painting on the wall since Lux looked so beautiful in it. For real, the artwork reminded her of another one. But the attendant hinted that she wasn't going to find any info about a clot of darkness in that painting. He said that Lux is almost always painted in white as a symbol of purity and light. So yeah, it's not exactly rocket science to figure out what the color black means and what kind of creature that is. And then he spilled something on the book saying it was the answer to her question about what this black entity really was. Then he handed the book to her, telling her to try reading it. So like a super long time ago, a dark evil force just appeared born from shadows, but after a while the creature spoke to a person. It offered the guy the chance to rule the world, but to get it he had to drink its blood. The man couldn't say no and drank the dark force's blood. This guy took the lives of so many other people before he founded the Northern Empire. He basically made a pact with evil itself, so all of that guy's descendants would be cursed. Now Joelle knew the whole truth. But it didn't make her feel any better. She so did not want to believe it was real. She was scared that Tess had been affected by it too. The professor noticed his assistant was acting super weird. He thought she was sick, so the guy invited her to a dinner party and she immediately said yes. She was actually so happy to go to an event with him. When evening came, Bless showed up at Joelle's house. This time he was even dressed up. Joelle looked like divine. The man was trying to do everything perfectly since he was taking her to dinner. The girl noticed the professor looked different tonight, but the second he was helping Joelle into the carriage, he felt a jolt like lightning. A seriously nasty chill ran down his spine. They got to the ball and literally everyone was staring at them. A lot of people were interested in Bless, since he was the cousin of the Duke of Rania, and he was seriously good looking. Plus, he was a professor at the academy. At that moment, the Marquis of Gilver came up to say hi. After greeting the guests, the Marquis took off. Everyone was having a great time. Only Bless felt sick being in the middle of the noisy crowd. He kept complaining that he couldn't get any peace, and that he should have just stayed home. Joelle understood that all the attention was because he was handsome, smart, and single. So he waited for the right moment, and was about to ask the girl to date him as lightning flashed all around them. It started to rain, and she totally couldn't hear his question over a huge crash of thunder. The next day, Joelle went to the palace and hid out in the forbidden section of the library, once again looking through that cursed tome. No matter how many books she read, not one of them mentioned anything about a deal with a dark entity. As soon as the holy water wore off, the book became impossible to read again. At the temple, though, she couldn't find anyone named Kisis. How was that even possible? She didn't get it. Even though the guy had vanished like smoke, the painting was still hanging in the temple. Now it seemed to her like the man had been sent down to give her that book. Meanwhile, Tess walked into the library. The girl had no idea why he was there. He was supposed to be in a meeting, but he came because he was feeling down. Joelle didn't get why he was sad. The thing was, she was spending time with another guy, but today he was going on and on about the professor. She was not a fan of the Emperor's hints. I mean, there's nothing going on between her and the professor, and there never will be. He was completely misunderstanding everything again. But Tess was positive he knew exactly what was up. Totally knew what was up, since he'd been keeping tabs on Yule and spotted all the things she was completely missing. Tess was seriously freaking out over the thought that if she'd just heard the professor's question, she could have clapped back. But the girl was totally in the dark, so she just straight up asked the Emperor what was bugging him. She had a gut feeling that he was convinced Blessed had a major crush on her, so she cupped his face in her hands and told him she did not see the professor that way at all. Then she kissed the Emperor, and she promised him that she wasn't interested in anyone but him, Tess. That definitely got to the Emperor, and he kissed her back. The kiss felt like it lasted forever, and it was about to get way more intense. But it didn't, and they just ended up lying on the library floor. Tess had been smart enough to lock all the doors so no one would walk in on them, because the time he spent with her was everything. Yule ran a hand through his hair, noticing how crazy soft it was. Tess got curious and asked what else she liked about him. Turns out she liked his eyes, and like if she really thought about it, his whole look was a vibe. The Emperor was totally psyched and asked her to list more, then gave her a playful tap on the cheek. He was literally glowing with happiness, thinking his girl was the absolute best. But then out of nowhere, his eyes changed color, turning bright red. The demon blood was pumping through his veins, making him want more. That's why he was starting to get a little more hands-on, but she stopped him and asked if he had something to tell her. Yule could tell the Emperor was on edge, so she went all in, asking if he seriously thought she wouldn't figure things out. Tess was terrified, because he had no clue which of his two massive secrets she'd discovered. He was completely lost on what to do, but then she switched gears to something basic, asking about the canceled meeting and if he was feeling okay. The guy let out a breath, saying he did it so she wouldn't stress out. Joel, on the other hand, was worried he'd lost weight and was scared he wasn't eating right, just like when they were kids. The guy just pulled her into a hug and said he'd do whatever she wanted. Joel was heading home. She was just staring out the window, totally zoned out. Back in the library, she'd noticed how desperately Tess was trying to hide the truth from her. Joelle knew he didn't have a choice, not with demon blood running through him, but even knowing that didn't change how she felt about him. I mean, she loved him so much she'd completely given up on trying to get back to her own world. Just then, a sharp pain shot through her heart, making her double over. Her whole body was shaking from the pain. Joel had no idea what was happening to her. She took it as some kind of warning sign. The carriage stopped. They were home. She stepped out, her legs feeling like jelly. Even the servants could tell something was off with her, but she just played dumb, acting like she had no idea what they were talking about. The coachman thought it seemed like the girl had taken a fall in the carriage. Joel shot that down and just gave Ryder a weak smile. In reality, she wanted to scream from the pain. She sighed and walked into the house. Her mom was standing at the top of the stairs, waiting for her, looking super happy and saying she'd already heard everything. Turns out she was talking about the party Joel went to with Blessed. The elf was so excited and wanted to invite him over, but the girl insisted they were just work friends. Even so, Zool was dying to hear all the deets about that night. The woman started to go get tea, but her daughter stopped her. Joel remembered how her mom was always super invested in her, especially her love life, and always wanted her to find a great husband. She gets it, because like every mom wants the best for their kid. But the elf never saw Tess as a potential husband for her, which was weird since they'd grown up together. So now she needed a straight answer to the question of why. The elf just looked at her daughter without saying a word, and she was right to, because one of the maids was totally eavesdropping on their conversation. They couldn't wait, so mother and daughter went to sit in the living room to talk. Joel did not want to talk over tea. She needed to know why her mom didn't approve of Tess. The girl knew it wasn't about his looks or anything shallow. Joel closed her eyes and let out a sigh. The woman looked sad, saying all she ever wanted for her daughter was a peaceful, happy life. When the girl was born, her mom found out about the prophecy that was tied to her. So she did everything she could to shield her from what she was destined to face. But then weird things started happening to the elf. Jill tried to explain but couldn't, like she was bound by some unbreakable contract. The thing is, the girl had half-human blood in her. That was the real reason she couldn't tell her the truth or interfere with her life, but Tess was a legit threat. Because as a mother, she just couldn't let her daughter be with him. But the elf had no idea it was already way too late for warnings. Still, she had no right to forbid Joel from seeing Tess. Because elves weren't allowed to meddle in human lives or tell them what to do. From like forever ago until now, elves have had their own strict laws, and the number one rule is that they can't influence human choices. If one of them breaks that rule, their soul literally starts to fall apart, and then it's just darkness for that elf. But Sue's love for her daughter was unconditional, and she promised to support her no matter what she chose. They hugged, and Joel totally missed the shadows that crept around her mother's fingers. When Joel was alone in her room, she pulled out a box with a red brooch, and just stared at the gift. Her thoughts drifted to Tess working away at the palace. At that same moment, he felt it and stopped writing. He just froze at his desk as if he was waiting for something. It was weird, he could feel the warmth of his girl right in his heart. Her touch was so light like a butterfly's wings. He just knew Joel was thinking about him, and if she'd only called, he would have dropped everything to get to her. Joel's project was finally a wrap. As they were packing up the books, Les totally noticed she kept sighing and figured something was up. I mean, she looked super conflicted, like she felt that she was a totally useless daughter, but the scientist told her he'd be lucky to have a daughter like her. He said Joel was smart, a hard worker, and just an all-around great person. But Joel was stressing, because her mom totally disapproved of the guy she wanted to be with. The man finally got what was going on, and said she needed to convince her mom that she was making the right choice. He tried to explain it using his own research as an example. Lots of people thought he set impossible goals for himself, but he never quit. He said that same attitude was exactly what her situation needed. Because if she makes it all happen on her own, then people will have to understand and get on board. Joel knew she had to get stronger because she really didn't want to lose Tess or her mom. She decided to get ready for anything, especially since she had no clue what the prophecy said, and to do that she had to get her mind and body in shape. Joel got home and immediately decided to hop in the bath. Just then, Gwell, who'd been waiting for her, popped out from behind a pillar. She showed her sister this really gorgeous envelope that had an invitation inside. It was from Tess, but saying his name in their house was still a major no-no. Gwell was so hyped because the Emperor said in the letter that he had a gift waiting for her. Joel offered to go grab it for her, but Gwell was dying to go too, since she was also invited. Our girl sat on the bed and made her sister promise not to tell their parents, and just like that, they showed up at the palace. Albert was there to meet them. The girls looked seriously stunning. He told them to follow him, and they went out to the garden where the Emperor was already waiting. He was literally glowing with happiness that Joel and Gwell came. He told them to drop the formal stuff, since it was just them out there. Turns out Tess had hidden some gifts around the garden, and Gwell immediately ran off to find them. So the Emperor and Joel were left alone. The next thing she knew, Tess leaned in and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. He was so glad she was able to come visit. Everything was in bloom and the garden looked insane, which is why he invited them. It was honestly perfect. Gwell was running around with the maids just living her best life while Joel watched from the sidelines. She thanked him for giving her such an awesome spring day, but what Tess really wanted was to ask her for a favor. The thing is, the Emperor did not want his girl talking to Dr. Bless, but since she wouldn't agree, he suggested a bet. The deal was, if she wins, he leaves the scientist alone. If he wins, he sends the guy away. To be honest, he'd rather just get rid of the professor for good, and since he was dead serious, he told Joel she better try her hardest. He was totally looking forward to the duel.